Welcome to Hardly Initiated Live. It is your host, Tyshawn Jackson, here with another episode of my co-host, Ryan Ketchens.
Man, I'm feeling good about this show, man. It's like I don't know if I could just stand waiting the whole weekend to speak to the niches.
Yes.
I love y'all.
We are back here on this beautiful Monday evening, and we are going to bring you a compelling episode, something we've never done that I'm very excited to bring to you today, because it seems like the guests just keep getting a little bit better every single episode. So stay tuned in here, my true crime junkies and my people that just want to stay away from all the madness. Tonight, we are talking crimes of passion with this very special guest that we have here on the stage. We are in here with a licensed psychotherapist. You've been featured on, I've seen you, you all over the place. You on Court TV, you on TLC. What other ET you on, Dr. Janie Lacy? But we are in this joint here with Dr. Janie Lacy tonight. So we're going to have a great show. Welcome to Hardly Initiated.
Glad to be here. Absolutely.
Yes, we are glad to have you. And we got a great show for you guys tonight. Dr. Janie Lacy came in this joint all the way from Florida to spend some time with us tonight to tell us how to escape these toxic situations that you might have brewing in your relationship right now. Some of y'all in it now, been in it, or know somebody that been there. But before we do it, Ryan, let's talk to the people.
Yo, I'm loving this because I already see people chiming in. We got a few people. We got somebody from Texas, somebody from Virginia. We got a couple people. It's their very first live experience. So
welcome.
We got to show out for that. Check this out, guys, because I know my initiates is waiting for some announcements from us. So just real quick, no live shows, okay? Sunday, December 24th, Monday, December 25th, and Monday, December 31st, guys. So we love y'all, but of course, we want to take a break and spend some time with our personal families on those days. I think that's Christmas, Christmas Eve, and New Year's Eve. So we figured out how to do something special for you guys. So look out for a special drop on December 28th. That's Thursday at 12 p.m., a very special premiere.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, this is good. This is good. Also, guys, next year, January 7th is going to be our very first Sunday live episode.
Ooh, man.
Yeah, same time, a little bit of a different vibe, right? Because we want to bring a little bit more dynamic shows to your daily routine or your weekly routine. So Sunday, January 7th will be our first live show, and we're doing 3 live shows a week. That's Sunday at 5 and Monday at Wednesday at 8 p.m.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And tell them to look, man. Tell them what we got coming though. We got some special things coming for them that they need to know about. Hardly in Love.
Oh yeah,
it's going down.
Yeah. So guys, this is kind of crazy. So everybody's been asking us about how to put together a series of questions or series of things that you can do to dig a little bit deeper when it comes to your dating and relationship experience. So me and Tyshawn, we personally went into the lab, okay? And I don't want to hurt any ladies' feelings, but some of these we actually tested.
Yes.
Actually, all of them.
We have.
And we found out the ones that didn't work.
Yes.
All right. So we put them together in a special card deck. You got that pulled up?
100 open-ended questions for you and your person. I'm telling you, fellas, it's the hack. Listen, you talk about you want to have a good conversation, a good date with your lady, just had this deck always ready. You as well, ladies. This is a must-have in the collection. And we're going to be telling you guys the release dates. We're going to order a few just to introduce it to the family. Let you guys use it, experience it, and then we'll let you guys know when the next drop is going to happen. But the first one is going to happen soon, so just look out for release dates, guys.
That's a fact. So we're about to get it popping, guys. Almost 1,000 initiates with the channel membership, guys, and we have officially been verified on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube, you see that little check mark, that means YouTube says we are official, guys. So I think it just means we're going global. We're about to take over the world. Yeah.
So let's start here today. Because again, we're talking crimes of passion here with Dr. Janie Lacy, and let's get into it. Because let's actually start from square one, just so the people can know. Because everybody might not be on the true crime wave and kind of knowing what's going on in that world, but we've probably all heard the word crime of passion, but might not know what it is. Explain that to me. What is a crime of passion?
So let's break it down and make it very, very simple. So when we think about a crime of passion, it's usually someone that is in relationship. So there's an act of violence that occurs, and there's usually 2 buckets that it comes from. Either it comes from jealousy or some type of anger, emotional impulsivity that usually results in some type of harm or violence, and usually in death in most cases.
Wow. And this is usually from a relationship, an intimate relationship between a man and a woman that for some way, for some reason, and you said it's typically what were the two reasons that it typically would happen?
Typically from a bucket of jealousy, or there's some type of impulse when it comes to heightened emotion, usually from anger, right? For the most of the
Mm,
cases that we talk about when it comes to my involvement with court TV, there are more intimate relationships. But you can also have situations where there's someone who is more of a random act of violence. And this is where we can see some of the stalking cases and these types of things that can result in someone losing their life. But when we call crimes of passion, it's usually because there is some type of emotional connection in that relationship, which is where that comes from.
interesting, interesting. And it's just, you know, I really want to get into that because I hate to hear this is like the extreme aspects of when a relationship really goes wrong. Now, just before, is this something that's a common occurrence that happens, or is this something that most people wouldn't necessarily have to worry about?
I think violence in relationships, especially toxic relationships, we can probably say that can be a lot more common than what's reported. So we look at statistics and what's reported, but it ending in someone losing their life, I mean, usually that's not the norm from toxic relationships, but it
Okay.
happens a lot more than what people would imagine, right? So when we look at the statistics, 1 out of 3 women who are leaving a relationship, the most dangerous time is when they are leaving the relationship. And that's something that comes from my own personal tragedy in my story. My sister Carmen was leaving her toxic relationship. She was on a restraining order. And while she was leaving, which we know is the most dangerous time, that resulted in her a death in front of her 2 children.
Wow. So when you say leaving, she told and communicated that she wanted to break up and leave the relationship.
So, in my personal story with my sister, she had already broken up with the father of her children and she was on a restraining order. But what tends to happen, which a lot of people don't understand, is that there's something that we call a trauma bond. And that trauma bond is you are bonded to the person who essentially is hurting you, but you also look in that place that the person who's hurting you to heal you. So, when people, which is why we have to be careful how we judge people. Well, why don't you just leave the relationship? It's not that easy, especially in that situation. So in my sister's case, she had already left the relationship. She was on a restraining order, and the person who ended up murdering her had was trying to be helpful. So he's trying to be helpful and wanting to help her move to her new place. So he gained access because he then got back in her good graces and her trust, and that's where he had access to take her life. So that particular situation where someone who's hurting you then has access to you in the sense where they regain your trust and they get back to having the same kind of cycle over and over and over again. That's common in toxic relationships, right? That's where we say, well, I can't stay, but I can't leave either.
Mm.
And you hear people going back and forth in the same relationship. We've broken up, we're back together, right? So there's a common denominator where sometimes we look at that trauma bond or that betrayal bond that occurs, but leading to someone's death, that's usually there are two buckets, right? It's going to be premeditated, where someone's thinking that I'm going to potentially take this person's life. In my sister's case, we believe there was some of that because he had mentioned to one of my other sisters that he was going to kill my sister 3 days before he did. Right. So there's a warning sign for people. Sometimes when people say things in passing, we don't take them as serious. And then when we look back at some of these cases that we will spotlight, there's someone that potentially had some type of warning before it actually occurred. But that's not always the case in some of these cases. But most of the crimes of passion occur because of an impulse. They black out, they rage. Sometimes they don't even remember the violence. And they truly don't remember because when our brain happens, our prefrontal cortex kind of blacks out. And then our logical thinking does no longer occur. So in those moments of just kind of the survival mechanism is the best way to put it as far as our brain. So you're going in survival and you're going into sometimes we'll call it that blind rage, right? So when those blind rage happens and the person comes back to sober and they have all functions of their brain, they don't remember some of the parts that actually occurred when there's been especially a consequence of death.
You know, it's interesting. I was literally just talking to someone about, you know, dating, and what we kind of came across was that the thoughts that men and women have, they're a lot different as far as some of our initial concerns when going out, like even on a first date. Because a guy might be thinking, man, I hope this woman ain't trying to get a free meal out of me. Or, she ain't one of these
Right.
just women that's just trying to take advantage of me in this way. But
Right.
at the most case, that's probably is the worst it can get for him. But women actually have this like concern sometimes. Yeah, I hope this dude don't straight like clobber me over the head and put me in his trunk. That's like a real concern. Like you have
Absolutely.
to consider physical safety, when you are a woman. And when we talk in crimes of passion, is there a difference in how often or who typically is the target for this from a gender perspective? Are women typically targets of the crime of passion, or does it happen just as often to men?
Well, historically, women have been the majority of the ones where the cases are reported. But we also know that men are abused and men also are victims of murder as results of crimes of passion, right? We can probably spotlight some of those. We were just talking about earlier about one where the wife found out of 20 years that her husband was cheating. You may remember the case where she took her car and she tried to run him over, right? So there are certain cases where women also get these blind rage and where they become emotional and do a lot of impulsive type situations. And we've also talked about some of these cases on court TV. But historically, women are still majority of the victims when it comes to crimes of passion or violence as a result of relationship, domestic violence in particular.
Got it.
Mm.
And so going a little bit deeper into the motives that typically go down, because I know you gave a couple, but is there another list? Like is it like infidelity, betrayal? Like what if we can take a step further into why, when we're looking at cases, do you see patterns in what is causing people to go this far and black out?
Well, generally speaking, one of the main patterns that we'll see in psychology, we call it object relations. And object relations is basically, if we relate it to a relationship, is you consider yourself as owning the woman. If we kind of make it a woman as the victim, you own her. She's your property. She's an extension of you. Most people don't say that, but that's what they subconsciously believe. So if she's doing something that's betraying how you think she should be, and sometimes it starts very subtly, you start telling her how she should dress. You start criticizing her friends. You start cutting off all the things that would give her life. And then you erode her self-esteem. And then the next thing you know, she's relying on you in that sense. So we're looking at a control factor. We're looking at betrayal. Or let's say a common issue is that she's outside and she happens to look at Ryan. And then the next thing, well, why were you looking at him like Ryan? Right. So we kind of look back at these small signs of control, of criticism, and there's some dynamics that occur very often in that case. So then when it comes to controlling that person and they're not acting or doing the way that you want them to be, then the emotionality and the anger in that domestic violence situation can continue to happen. And that's where you'll see sometimes, well, people will say in domestic violence, well, why does she keep staying? Because she's holding on to those moments, what we call it crumbing, right? So there's moments where he is really attentive, he is really loving, and then she holds on to those moments and she keeps trying to get back to those moments. But yet, what she'll do is she'll tell herself a narrative. Well, only if I'm a better wife or I'm a better girlfriend, only if I sex him more, if I'm cooking, I'm doing all the things that he wants me to do, then he won't be upset with me. And then you see her walking on eggshells and she's changing
Right.
her personality. So most of the time we see the crimes of passion happen because of jealousy or because they're angry because somehow you are not doing or being who they want you to be in that object relations, because you are an object to them in a sense of they own you and you're an extension of them. And sometimes we'll see that coming from their childhood because there's a lot of unhealed people in the world. And it can be sometimes for men, it could be issues that they had with women early on in their life with their mothers, or let's say that first betrayal, that first person who broke their heart and they've never dealt with it and they pushed it down. But usually someone that is involved in crimes of passion, they've had some type of violent history before. But what will
Wow.
happen is either their family or their friends or their previous relationships will make excuses for them. Because when something happens and someone's life is taken, then you see all the exes coming out and saying, yeah, he was violent, or we did see this, or he did have mental health issues, but it's usually in hindsight.
I got so many questions for you. I want to talk about this very briefly because we had a show last Wednesday where we talked just a bit about abuse and abusive situations. And on that episode, we had Dr. Tard and Dr. Stacy, who had, I would say, completely different opinions on kind of how to go about the situation, right?
Right.
And Dr. Stacy specifically, her stance was, hey, the victim should have the strength and the gumption to leave. And of course, we had a lot of people that was very upset by those statements. And the main thing was the feedback that we got from that particular statement was that it is not that easy. You're right. And there's so many other things that weren't being evaluated in this very simple statement that she made. So just very curious, when it comes to walking away, like how does that really look for somebody who's being actively victimized by their significant other?
So we have a program called Women Redeem, and that's exactly what we do is we help women recover from toxic
Mm,
relationships. And in order to leave a relationship, there has to be a plan. And one of the number one ways that we find that is pivotal in a woman leaving a toxic relationship is her support system. It's
mm.
not that easy just to say, well, they should have enough strength and just to leave within themselves. Because if they had that, they wouldn't be in that potential situation in the first place. And there's many factors that are involved. So a woman will return back to that toxic relationship more times before she actually leaves that relationship. She's left a long time in her head, but there has to be a plan. So we look at not only getting her to a place of radically accepting the situation. She has to radically accept that situation that is not going to change, that that is who that person is going to be, and that there's no, because what happens, we hold on to the hope for the future that they are going to change. So that's the first step, radically acceptance. And then second, we have to look at her resources. What are her resources that she has available to her? And the number one thing that keeps people not going back is their support system. Because when you get, we know just the way that the brain works, about 2 weeks, about let's say 14 days to 21 days after you leave a toxic relationship, you have enough distance from that relationship. You start kind of what we call getting amnesia, right? You start
Wow.
remembering all the good things and you start missing them, which is normal. But you start focusing on that, which brings you back into that relationship versus remembering why you left. So, what one of the things we have them do is having a list even before they leave. Why are all the reasons why they need to leave that relationship? So when they're tempted to go back, they pull out that list and they have a safe circle of people. And this can be professionals, it can be people that are in their family, but they have to be mature people. It can't be the person that just says, well, you just need to leave, is no good for you. It's the
Right.
person that has empathy, that has sympathy, that when they are tempted, that they can go to that person because they're safe, they're not going to be judged. And the more they do that, because we know if you work out the impulsivity of wanting to call the person who's hurting you or you want to get back, if you give yourself on average about 22 minutes and you're distracting yourself, you have an outlet of support, the impulsivity to want to go back and contact person becomes less. So if I was to go through all of those steps, it's not that easy just to leave because they have to have this plan that has to happen over and over and over again. And we know on average it takes about 90 days of detoxing from a relationship before you even have enough strength to take that next step. So it's not just
Wow.
saying this person is not good for me and I'm going to leave, especially if there's emotional attachment, there's trauma bonding, and there's some level of what we call unfinished business. There's a reason why you're with that person, whether it's consciously known to you yet.
Mm,
So, but we do know they need to have a strong support system so that they're not alone. They have to have a tribe of people around them. So when we studied the women that come through our program, the ones that have been most successful, that is a pivotal. They have a safe place, they have a tribe, and they have women that are subconsciously holding them up so that they won't go back to that relationship. But what happens in these toxic relationships is people stay in secrecy. They're ashamed
mm.
because of opinions like that. For someone to say, well, you should just leave, you should have enough strength to do that. And when you have an opinion like that, then people are not going to go and tell somebody because they're going to feel like no one gets me. They don't understand that I keep coming back and they don't want to be judged. So then that keeps them there when they're in that place of secrecy and they hide it. And that's what happens not only with my sister or many other women is that you find out something has happened when there's a crisis
Mm.
because of that reason that we are so judgmental and we send messages like that.
I didn't think about that. Just that kind of stance and communicating that way could really shut somebody down versus,
Mhm.
versus the intent, which I'm sure you would only say that because you want them to
Right.
get out. But just with that message being delivered, it is extremely judgmental for
And
sure.
I
You know,
understand why people say that, right?
Right.
Because they do want to have this positive motivation and they think that by having this motivational speech
You
that
better get
that's
up and you
that
better.
that's going to be helpful, but
Right.
it actually kind of puts people in shame.
so
Right.
I want to actually put this poll out here because I really want to understand the people's relationship with the topic that we have in here tonight. So, Ron, let's actually drop a poll, man. How many people have experienced loss, from a crime of passion? Whether
Mm.
that may have been, someone that near and dear to you, a friend, a family, anybody else. I want to know how common this might be with the initiates that are currently in here. And in the meanwhile, while that poll is coming out, you did say a lot of people that go about being, you know, someone to be this person to go off and potentially even take someone's life. They have a history of violence. Okay. And how do you avoid that? We've had a couple people come up on here and talk about the infamous background check that they're starting to do, which sounded just kind of weird to me. But when you're talking about this, do you think that should be common practice to be able to, you know, get a background check on somebody you're dating to figure something like this out? Or do you just kind of play and kind of watch how they move, or, you know, evaluate their patterns? How do you best see, you know, recognize that type of history?
I think, well, all of the above, right? So if, for example, if you're online dating and the person is a complete stranger for you, that is something that you have access to, especially it's not that hard to do a background check on someone. So that would be your first step. But not all background checks are going to reveal someone's character issues, or if they've had a history of violence, it's just not reported. Right. So I think the second thing would be is to move slowly and to evaluate that person. Not only you can't observe someone unless you've had repetitive experiences around them, you know, groups of friends. How are they treating the waiter? How do they handle traffic? I mean, there are some little clues to how someone handles their emotion, because emotional intelligence and emotional regulation tells a lot about a person, right? Do they have what we call in psychology a window of tolerance? A window of tolerance is when there's a lot of stress or there are situations that cause you to be stressed. How do they handle those emotions? And someone that potentially has a propensity towards violence, they can only fake it for so long, right? And sometimes what people will see is we make excuses. They threw the keys, they were frustrated, they slammed the door. Well, everybody does that, right? So people will tell themselves, because they're so attached to the outcome of that potential person that they want to date, whether they're attracted to them, whether they have all these good qualities that they see as a potential partner, then we start making excuses for their bad behavior because there's some type of tie. So we have to not be tied to the outcome, and we have to move slowly, be patient, do the background check. And I'm a big believer, at some point, if it's someone that's going to be in your life for, you know, that they're potentially for a long-term partner, bring them around your friends and family. And if they don't want to be around your friends and family yet, that should be a red flag,
Oh,
because your
okay.
friends and family are not emotionally tied to them yet. But you have to also be in a position where obviously you have to make decisions for yourself, but you're open to other people's opinion and some of their experiences with the person you're bringing around. And sometimes it's not necessarily black and white, it could be an intuitive nature.
Mm,
Now,
yeah.
are some people more susceptible to becoming victims than others? Like, is there certain things that somebody could do where it's like, okay, you operating like that is you putting yourself at more risk for somebody kind of to come around and take advantage of you?
Well, that's a major key, right? So for anybody, if we haven't done our own work, and what I mean by done our own work is that we don't have a PhD in our own history. We go to the school and we learn so much about other people's schools, right?
Right.
All of us. But the most important thing is we need to have a PhD in our own history. What are our childhood wounds? Where are our vulnerabilities? What are the potential things that we're unhealed in? What's our template of life? We all have a template of life. That means our caregivers, our mother, our father, they're going to download certain messages for us. And if we can't even speak about our traumas and we can't even talk about in safety our wounds, then that's the first step, right? Because if we're not what happens is that people will push it down. Well, that happened in the past, or they will get the good news junkie. They try to turn everything into good news. Well, I wouldn't be this way. And there's some truth to that. I wouldn't be this way if it wasn't for my history. Yeah, but we also have to speak about the wounds as a result of that history. We all have some levels where we can look at both sides of the coin. So doing your work, becoming healed, having high self-esteem, walking in confidence, and not necessarily, and I'm not saying this from like a woman empowerment standpoint, but not thinking that your life depends on a relationship. You enter to this world single
Mhm.
as a person, you're going to leave this world, right? So, but when we go from a place of desperation, then we will look at people with red rosy glasses. And again, we may see all the warning signs. We may feel it in our intuitive nature, but again, we're tied to the outcome. So you have
Wow.
to do your work, and you have to, and it's a red flag when we don't have a good circle of friends. Because if you get you're getting filled by your friends, right? Your emotional, I'm talking not necessarily the things you would get from a romantic relationship, but you're not necessarily, because if you put yourself in a situation where you don't have a good circle of friends, your life is not fulfilled, then a relationship will become all your eggs are going to be in that basket. And then you're potentially setting yourself up, because then that becomes your lifeline.
That's so wild to me. I really wonder how many people might be in a relationship and not willing to leave literally because they don't think it's a better option out there.
I would say there's a lot of people that
Really?
think, okay, well, this is the devil I know, right? We hear all these sayings all the time. So they'll settle for the companionship. They'll settle for even being the most lonely. And I think this is really sad. The most loneliest place being when you're in a relationship, right?
Mm,
Because you're at least you have somebody there and you're convincing yourself because of the thing of the unknown. And especially if you've not had an experience of having a healthy relationship, if you haven't had experience of really having someone see you, right? Intimacy into you, I see, right? So when someone really sees you and you've been vulnerable and they've been able to hold space for you, that's an experience when you have that. I mean, you now know what it feels like to be loved. And when you don't have that, then you stay closed up, you stay reserved, you stay guarded. Or for some of my women that I work with, they stay busy, right? Because that's a way to kind of pour out their anxiety. They're cleaning, they're doing all this other stuff, or they're getting another degree, they're doing all these other things, right? Because they don't have to sit with their self. But the best place that we need to be is like on that Sunday afternoon, there's nothing going on. Tyshawn, can you sit with yourself and not have the TV on, not have music, and just be able to sit with your own thoughts, right? There's a sign of healing there. So there's these clues that can set you up for success. But what will happen is if you get into a relationship and that first red flag happens, can you speak your boundary? Because I think there needs to be a warning before you just have this rigid exit, right?
okay.
Is that, it's not okay that you're talking to me that way, right? And then see how the person responds, right? Because there's some clues there.
So some people can genuinely just not know how to act. Is that what you're saying? Like, is that why you would give them opportunity?
A growth mindset.
Okay.
Can you give someone
Okay.
feedback, and to your point, maybe they're not aware of it and how
Okay.
they respond to it? Okay, well, cool, my bad. You know what? I'll be aware of that next time versus the gaslighting. Well, what are you talking about? That didn't happen, right? And then they get into, but if it's familiar, they'll put a dog in that fight, right? Then they start arguing and they get into that because, right, when we look at from an attachment standpoint, we look at this attachment standpoint of anxiety, you're used to the roller coaster ride, the come here, go away. So that's why we have to understand our history. Because if you're used to that, then someone who's good for you maybe seem boring, right? We don't have chemistry, we don't have the spark, we don't have these types of things. Because what's happening is your nervous system, that's trauma. Is that I need to be able to have the argument, or I need to be able to have a little bit of tension, or I need to have chemistry, these types of things. That's not necessarily always healthy.
So you know what?
Wow.
Let's do this because I actually want to talk about that next. I
You
want
wanna
to kind
close
of
that
go into
poll?
some of the signs that this person might be abusive for both men and women. And I want to know if they're the same or if there is any difference. But let's actually go ahead and close it out. Let's see what the people got here.
So I'm gonna close out this poll. We actually light on the poll. We got just over 100 votes. Have you ever experienced loss from a crime of passion? And most people say no. 74% say no, but it is that 25% that say yes,
Mhm.
which
Wow.
is, I mean, 1 out of 4 people. That's awful.
That's common
Yeah.
enough for the people in here.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. So listen, and by the way, if you're watching the replay, let us know in the comment section because I really want to know here. I invite everybody, please go ahead and smash the like button here.
Yeah.
Press that gray like button here so we can go ahead and spread this here around the YouTube streets because people need to go ahead and join this conversation because we are warming up here with Dr. Janie Lacy. And now,
Yes. Shout out to VJ too, by the way. She already listen. VJ showing love. She said, "Thank you, Dr. Lacy." So that's what's up.
much love,
Thank you,
VJ.
VJ.
Thank you, Dr. Lacy, for some sound counsel.
Absolutely.
That's what we're here for.
Absolutely. Sound counsel. Let's talk about some of these signs
Mm-hmm.
because the signs that somebody's abusive, if I'm a guy and I'm a woman that's dating, are they the exact same signs or is it a bit of a different if I'm a guy, what I'm looking for versus if I'm a lady?
Well, let's talk about some of that are common. And first, let me say this. Some of these signs doesn't necessarily mean that that person is going to potentially be abusive, right?
Disclaimer.
We need to say that, right? But in hindsight, the ones that end up where they become violent or there's domestic violence or potentially resulting in someone's death, these are some of the common signs that are there. When we look at first, relationships are a marathon, they're not a sprint. Sometimes people can hurry the relationship while things are in this new stage, and there's a reason for that. And they're giving you lots of compliments. They're pouring you with lots of love because there is ability to disarm you. When you're getting all the good stuff and it happens very quickly while emotions are new and all the other stuff, there's usually a reason for that. So relationship move very quickly. You don't even know his middle name, but you already got the U-Haul truck outside, right? So you want to be really, really careful at the pace
Oof.
of the relationship in the beginning is the first thing. And the second thing is over time, it's a death by 1,000 cuts. They start criticizing you, but then they disguise it as jokes, right? So it can
Mm.
happen, but it's the pattern. It's not the problem. Somebody can have a problem and criticize you once, and then they correct it, right? And then they give you feedback in a different way. So we're looking at patterns, not problems. The pattern of criticism, the pattern of control, the pattern of isolation, and the pattern of intermittent anger. So they're not angry all the time, but what they do, it's scary. And you start walking on eggshells, and then you start questioning, well, did that really happen? And you
Mm.
feel it inside of you. So those are some common, some early signs that you don't want to ignore. But the first time, it can be an escalation. It's not necessarily domestic violence. It can be the verbal abuse. It can be some of the control. It can be the mental abuse. It can be the gaslighting. But then it could be when he was angry that he started slamming the cabinets, or he started throwing his keys, or he started driving the car real fast. But if there is some
Wow.
history,
That
right?
is that is
Hey.
really
Are you driving the
threatening.
car fast?
Well, yo,
No, no,
what,
no, no, no,
what
no,
are you
no.
doing
But that's
right
just
now?
like really
Yes.
diabolical.
No.
Like that's
Right.
just major disrespect.
Facts.
And just
Mhm.
that's
But what will happen is these things, they sound extreme, but if really people think about their relationships, they may have had an incident like that, but we make excuses for it. Where he was upset, he was whatever the excuse may be,
Girl, he
because
love you. He
because no
love
one ever
you.
thinks that this is going to happen to them. No one ever thinks that the person that they love is going to somehow hurt them, right? But that's where that saying is the thin line between love and hate, because there's some truth to that when it comes to these toxic, dysfunctional, domestically violent relationships. So the first time you have a boundary and you say something about it, see if things change over time. But that's where, when you feel like it in your body that something is wrong, you need to talk to someone and have a safe place for that. You need to be able to talk to someone versus ignore it, especially today more than ever.
mm,
I mean, that's just man. That's just interesting. When I'm going back to the, because you say your sister. For those of you who missed it, probably early in the show, your unfortunately your sister was
Mhm.
actually a victim
Yes.
of this. And when we go into those, some of those patterns that you broke down a bit earlier, did you see just about all of those patterns go down in that relationship before that event finally occurred?
Well, because it happened when I was young, right? So
mm.
this has been quite some time. But I can tell you the one thing that we do know now, that when we look back was a red flag, was there was so much isolation. So I think a lot of times when our friends or our family, right, we get this saying, check on your strong sisters, right? Because let me say this, it doesn't matter how successful you are or how unsuccessful you are, what color you are, how much money you have in the bank. This happens to across the board, right? Regarding your economical status, whatever it may happen. And sometimes for our strong sisters, when they're in domestic violent relationships, whether they're CEOs of company, they're C-suites, they're successful entrepreneurs, for them, sometimes they have more even a reason to hide it because there's so much shame around it, because they should just know better. They're successful and these types of things. So in my sister's case, there was isolation. But we'll say, well, she's just busy with her family, or she's busy with her kids, or she's busy with her career. If you have an intuitive nature and you think that your friend or a family member is someone that potentially you may have an intuitive, I don't know about their relationship, check on them and sometimes ask them. The
Right.
worst thing that they can do is get offended. But you ask the question, right? But how you ask the question is going to be important. And sometimes what happens if someone kind of pushes back, then you go away. Stay present in a way that's safe for that person, especially if you think someone is potentially in a domestic violent relationship.
And there's man, I'm just thinking about so many different things at once, because it doesn't always have to be at that end of the spectrum where it's gotten physically abusive, but it could just be somebody who you see is trapped into a toxic relationship where it's more so you see the signs of control, right? And I think Tyshawn, I think weren't you telling me about like an experience somebody had, like it wasn't all the way to domestic violence, but it was like just some
Yeah,
controlling things that was kind of
absolutely.
happening.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and I haven't heard that, not even just one time. I've heard that happen many times.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
So that's just the reality of the situation out here. And I'm really interested to hear, some of the people's thoughts about this as well. And as a matter of fact, what I want to do here, Ryan, because we're at the 35-minute mark right here now, let's actually let's actually shout out just for a brief second as we before we continue the conversation. I actually want to take a step here to shout out actually one of our members of the channel really quickly. It was our previous member that won that won our competition that we recently had.
Oh, Selena.
Big shout out to Selena.
Selena Hill. Yeah, shout out to Selena. So
Selena
we did
got her book.
Yeah, we did a book giveaway. This was the professional matchmakers.
Yeah,
that came up, did an awesome show. They got the book Relationship Do-Overs, which I thought was pretty cool. So we did the book giveaway for that. And Selena did such a good job sending us that beautiful photo. Did you post that yet?
I already did, man. Big shout out
lit.
to Selena. Thank you so much for going ahead and joining this thing here. How are you feeling about the initiation hotline?
Yeah, we can get it popping.
Let's go ahead.
Get it popping.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get the initiation hotline rolling here, guys.
And so, I know when the hotline bling.
What we're gonna do is we're gonna go
I
ahead
love that sound.
and we're gonna go ahead and pin that in the chat here for the people to go ahead and tune into the conversation here. Okay, so I want y'all to go ahead and you will see it. All right, it's gonna be here in the chat for my people here in live. Make sure you already know the drill. Okay, when we post this thing here, you got your camera on, you got your audio ready, and you are ready to go live. Because when you come backstage, we're gonna bring you on at any point in time. And today, I want to talk to some of our people that may have experienced this, whether that may be family, whether that may be friends. And even if you might be in a situation where it's getting a little tricky, like Ryan said, I know a few people that have gotten to these little tricky situations. In fact, let me ask you about one of these in particular.
Topic is heavy.
If you have a guy who is, and you know what, let's actually start here because Dr. Janie was talking about this before the show a little bit. I don't know if y'all know this, y'all, but I got on the app Snapchat about like 8 months ago. I was doing something on my phone, re-downloading all my apps, like new phone, whatever the case is. I got on my Snapchat account. I haven't been on there in like a year. They had an update on there probably like 2 years, and they had an update where now you can actually see the location of the users on the app. And I hit it, and I was so surprised to see so many, not just the men, but the women. It's bad enough for men, but the women who literally had their address available for the world to see on a social media app. A lot of these women, even single ladies, probably dating guys, bringing guys into their lives that they don't know very well. Creepy situation going on. I don't know what kind of trust. What do you think about that? About people giving just the world that level of access to them?
I think we can be delusional. We can be delusional and we can be in denial that we don't think bad things can happen to us. And I'm just saying that collectively, right? So no one ever goes out in the world and thinks that bad things are going to happen. So what that means is sometimes you are not as protective and you're not as thinking through some of these decisions that you're making with giving people access to you. Access is earned. And when you think about a location, right, you're out there. If people have bad intention, then it's easy for them to get access to you or know how you move. So when you think about it from that standpoint, is that to not, especially on social media, right? So to not post, right? We have these conversations all the time, to not post live time when you're when you're at a location, to not let people know where you're at. If you want to do that after you leave, right? So there are some common things that I think it's important to educate people on. And the first thing is to not live in delusion, to not think that there are not people out there who could be watching you and you don't even know that they're watching you, or that bad things can't happen to you. So protect yourself, check all these apps, take the locations off. Don't post real time if you're at, the Waffle House. Wait till after you leave. Just take some precautions and make that a part of your lifestyle choices so that you don't have to think twice about it.
Should a woman find it a red flag in particular, and man too, by the way, for this in particular, someone who's always trying to track if they have a partner that's kind of obsessed with tracking them from the aspect of their text messages, where they are, they might have caught them going through their phone on multiple occasions, or having this habit to always almost have this level of obsessiveness, even though they might again make excuse for it or whatever the case is. How dangerous is that for someone to have that level of passion to know your whereabouts?
I think it depends on the situation. So you have two buckets of women, I'll just kind of put in a general sense. You have a woman that potentially has an intuitive nature that something is going on and she's playing detective, right? That's not necessarily going to help the situation. The very fact that you have that feeling, you need to take a different course of action. But if you're doing that from a place of insecurity, or if you're doing that from a place of control, especially if potentially there's some other things that are in place, it can be very dangerous, because when you look at some of these crimes of passion, for example, that's where the control and the jealousy can start. And then let's say, the typical scenario where you said that you were getting your nails done. And when I looked at the app, you weren't getting your nails done. Now, where were you? Perhaps there was something not necessarily right with that location, but it looked like she was somewhere else, right? And then a lot of people can get very angry. That can escalate into types of violence. But the very fact, there are couples that share each other's location. There's different. But if you're dating somebody and they're in a place where they want to track you and they want to have access to you, that should definitely be a red flag, especially if there's no reason for it.
Do you find that in healthy relationships, that's not the case? Like, in healthier relationships, are couples even given access to, is that a big concern in those relationships that you found on your
When we
end?
look at mature couples, there's a certain level of privacy. There are couples, like I said, that are families that share location and those types of things, right? Because there's no big deal about it. Most people are where they say they are. But if you want to have access to like emails and you want to go dive deeper in these types of things, you have to ask yourself why. So being in the betrayal trauma space, when people are recovering from betrayal, we will actually see some of that, right? That there is a period of time where the person gives, because they're choosing to stay in the relationship, that they give access to the other person to bring them security, to bring the reassurance that they're recovering from whatever betrayal that they had. But if that's not part of the relationship, and if that's not part of the agreement that the couple has, and one person is demanding that and the other person feels obligated to give that, then that's going to be a power and control situation that's not going to be healthy. And there's nothing that ever comes good out of those situations. So when it comes to mature couples, they have agreements, and they come to agreements to things that may protect their relationship, but they're agreeing to it from two healthy adults. But if one person is demanding it, or one person feels like they have to do it and it's not something that they feel comfortable with, then we can see the writing on the wall. It's like the mold, that wall's going to eventually come down.
Wow. As a matter of fact, hold that thought, Ryan.
Okay.
Can we please go ahead, guys? The link is in the chat. The link is pinned, and we've also dropped it in the chat. So again, if you have had any experiences with anything, with any level of an abusive relationship, or know somebody that has, please come up here and talk to us here, the Hardly Initiated family, tonight, as we got Dr. Janie Lacy on here. Or again, if you have any questions regarding it, I want to bring you guys up here so we can have a conversation tonight. But Ryan, please go ahead and give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm just pinning this to the chat because it's really tricky, because, we got these video calls too. That's a whole nother thing. So I already know people probably a little bit apprehensive about calling in because it's so heavy. But
absolutely,
I just thought about this, Dr. Lacy, because I just want to be clear. Does crime of passion, does it have to be in a committed relationship, or can it happen outside of a committed relationship? Let's say like in the dating phase or pre-dating phase.
And when does it happen most?
Yeah,
to be honest. But go ahead.
So it happens most in the context of relationships, but it does not have to be, right?
Okay.
On Court TV, we will talk about different cases that result in stalking, where the person didn't even really know the person who was stalking them, that got access to them, that broke into their house and did some type of violent crime. So when you think about whether it's movies, you may not know anyone personally, but you think about movies or cases that you've heard, it's not always that they specifically knew the person that happened, but more times than not, it's usually someone that had repetitive access to them, which is usually in a context of a family or a relationship.
That makes sense. So the reason I asked that is because this actually happened to me last week. I had a friend of a friend actually call me, a young lady, and she called me kind of whispering. It's kind of weird, like I'm like, why are you calling me kind of deal? But she's kind of whispering, and then she's like, hey, I just I needed somebody to talk to. Like, this was like the first number came up. I just called you because this weird guy's outside my place. And I'm like, okay, so, I'm asking questions. I turned to straight detective. I'm like, all right, you see him, he in the car, I'm asking details. But then, of course, she got into her house, and now I'm like, I'm just curious, like, how does this even start, right? So I'm like, okay, well, what was the situation? And she's telling me that, she met a guy in the Uber who was her Uber driver, okay? And in some form or fashion, they exchanged numbers, okay? Now, they started like a text conversation, and somewhere along the way she decides that she has no interest in this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he starts sending her explicit photos.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. A few days later, she pulls up to her apartment. This guy, and she remembers the car is outside the exact spot that he dropped her off. Now, my thing is like, in my mind, I really wanted to go into what the hell were you thinking, giving some dude who drive Uber your phone number, right?
Mm-hmm.
But instead, I kind of, went like, hey, that's not a good idea. I was very soft about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then after I got off the phone with her, I kind of felt in this weird place. Like, what kind of counsel should I have given this person? Because I've seen that on so many different levels. Like, I've been places with my friends, and we talking to a group of young ladies, and it's 6 of us, and one of the young ladies decides to stay. And I'm looking at her and her friends like, are y'all crazy? Like, don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I'm good. Anybody around me is good,
Mm-hmm.
right? But
right.
that's crazy as hell. You're going to leave your homegirl with 6 dudes. But it's so many, I see things like that all the time, right?
Yeah.
So when that types of situation happens, because don't get me wrong, the ladies that were the friends, I'm sure were thinking the same thing I'm thinking. Like, this is pretty crazy. But how do you tell somebody that you care about, or somebody that you want to, see not get into these very tricky situations where they risk themselves being assaulted or more or worse, right? How do you communicate to them in a healthy way that they're making really bad decisions?
The best way is to first, depending on who the person is. So if it's someone that you know really well, like your friend, for example, then that means that she has history with you. So she may trust you. She knows that you love her, because then that's tough love. I don't believe that you need to sugarcoat that, but I do believe it depends on the person. So if it's someone that may not be around her all the time, and them giving that feedback, it may not be received well. But if she came to you and said, hey, this is what's going on, but it's how you say it. Right? Saying it from that place of love, saying from that place of care and concern, but being a straight shooter when it comes to those types of things. That, you know what, I'm so glad that nothing occurred, but, I'm going to make up her name, Rachel, in the future, I would suggest, yeah, maybe fun just to kind of flirt and exchange information, but we ought to be careful in these streets these days, right? So how you say that to her is going to be important. But the worst thing you could do is see it and not say it. And I'm a big believer in that. But it depends on how you say it. If you're going to come and shame her and those types of things, then again, she may not come to you in the future. But how you say it as a friend, I'm a believer that you need to call her out on that behavior. Because sometimes people do that because, again, they go back to, they don't think these things are going to happen to them, or in the moment they're impulsive, they're flirting, it feels good. And, they don't know this person. They may think he's cute, and in their head, let me see where this is going. And then rejection, when we look at crimes of passion, rejection is one of those things that could be a trigger potentially if that person is a setup for violent behavior. Rejection is key. When they feel rejected, that shame comes over them, and then they potentially can make some really bad decisions from that anger place.
Wow. That makes sense. And when that rejection comes in, and see, the thing about it, you may in that situation think a guy is attractive or a young lady is attractive, but if you decide to reject them, they now know exactly where you live.
They have access. They got access. And that's where, collectively speaking, we got to move past the one dimension, right? Just the flirting and just looking at how somebody looks. Like, who are they? But that goes back to you. Like, what is your values? What are your principles? And even what's your intentions with dating? Are you just dating just to get to know people? Are you dating to look for a long-term partner? Because that's also going to dictate how you move. But I think what we want to do, in particular, like, let's say with your friend Rachel, is there needs to be accountability around dating, especially if she found herself potentially in a dangerous situation. But her friends around her, how they speak to her, will dictate if she's going to share or not. Because a lot of people have these situations, they don't even talk about it.
They don't talk about it. And, I remember growing up, what my mom used to be like, hey, especially when I went to college, she's like, hey, don't let nobody pour you a drink. You make sure you get your own drinks. But I feel like we've gotten so far away from protecting ourselves. And it seems like we're just open to, I guess because of the internet, and you could just meet people like that.
Right.
It seems like we're open to all types of connection, and we're not really thinking about logistically how you can put yourself in a situation to be victimized.
Right. And not to talk about this because it ages me, but when I was growing up, you only had access to the people you can see.
Right.
So there's a limit of people that you can see. You know their families, right? You have some level of understanding where they've come from. Where now we have the illusion of choice. So if things are not working out with Ryan, then I can go over to Tyshawn. I can go to the next person, right? We're so disposable of people because there's this illusion of so many choices. And then that makes people feel, especially if you think you're connected with someone on social media, you have this illusion that you think you know them because you see one dimension of their life. You see them, the things that they're going, and then you think that you know them. And we see that just from a professional standpoint too, right?
Yeah.
When you see people, you think you know them. Like people probably think they know the two of you,
right?
Right?
They do. I'm like, yo, do not touch me unless I invite you to touch me.
Right.
But it's like that though.
But
I'm
gonna be honest. Look, folks, is not getting less crazy, people. So we need to make sure we protecting ourselves the best way that we can. In fact, I have somebody that's been in here patiently waiting to get up on here and talk with us. We are in here. I'm going to bring to the stage now Dr. Georgianne Thomas. Welcome to the stage, Dr. Georgianne Thomas. How are you? Hey, can you hear me?
Take it off mute, Dr. Georgianne.
You got to listen. You know,
Hi, can you hear me?
There
we
you
sure
go.
Can.
What's up?
I can hear you. Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Dr. Georgianne, could you do me a favor? Could you give me your age, your location?
Hey, I'm very happy to be here. I am very old school.
I can't hear.
Okay, I'm sorry. You said well, hold on, wait, 1 second. I think it's like a little delay in me. You getting what I'm telling you. But if you can, please give me your age, your location, and your question. Oh, Dr. Georgianne, listen. I need you to work them sound
okay,
issues.
So I'm in Atlanta. I am 81.
Okay, you're in Atlanta and you're 81 years old.
I can't hear her.
You said you're in Atlanta and you're 81 years old, right? It's a delay right now.
Oh.
Listen,
she's shaking her head.
And I am happy that, yes, and I'm very happy that you're having this show.
Okay. Well, Dr. Georgianne, I'm gonna need you to do me a favor because we having some issues. I need you to go ahead and tell me. I need you to go ahead and come in here and tell me why you called in, so we can go ahead and get your question.
I'd like for her to talk more about the solutions, temporary protective orders. Talk some more about same-sex DVD.
Okay.
Protection orders and what was it? What was the
same? It was same sex. What now?
It's just a little delay.
It's about to take about 4 seconds for the sound to travel.
DV, domestic violence.
Okay.
Well, look, because
same sex DV.
Yes, and look, listen, Dr. Georgianne, because the audio is not well, I'm gonna let you go and we're gonna go ahead and answer that question for you. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Much love to you.
Shout out to her for calling in. I'm not sure if that's us or that's the doctor having those issues.
And listen, also, by the way, I know it's some issues tonight. I heard a couple people say they might want to come up private. So listen, tonight, because I get it's a sensitive topic, here's what I'm gonna let y'all do. You can come up, you can put an anonymous name backstage. You don't have to turn your camera on. And what we'll do, we'll just let your audio up backstage and we'll let you talk completely anonymous. But I do want to still have a conversation with the family from anybody that may have experience or think they may be experiencing something like this. So you can still join that link and come up and we will bring you up without video, guys.
And who was 81? Did she say she was 81?
Yes.
Wow. That is beautiful.
Yes.
That is, man, we got to get her back on.
Shout out to the OGs. Listen, we just got to go ahead.
Get her back on. That's amazing.
Yeah, look, Dr. Georgianne, we got to get that Wi-Fi turned up over there, all right? We got to turn it up and not
Dr. Georgianne, let me tell you something. At 81, she can tell us about some stuff.
But what was her question? Right? Let's answer her question.
Well, just about protective orders.
What is what does she mean by that, by the way?
And you know what? Because now that I think about it, Dr. Lacy, as she was a friend of a friend, you know, she called in or she called me. I was thinking like, outside of just general counsel, should I have told her like to call the police or like what's the situation if something like that even happens? So could you tell us what's a protective order? And then also what is like, when is the indicator that you should get police or another party involved in something, you know, potentially dangerous?
Well, whenever you feel like your life is in danger, and at any point in time, if someone threatens you, you should take that serious. I'm a big believer. You report that, you take that serious. But sometimes, again, people don't think it will happen to them. But if it comes to the case where someone has repetitively threatened you, they stalked you, and you've asked them not to contact you, and you've took the measures to not create access to you, and they still violate your boundaries, you should absolutely file a restraining order and get a protective order, depending on the situation, especially if you created that boundary and asked them to not call me, do not come to my house, it's over, and they still do that, then I would not play with that at all. You go ahead and get the authorities involved and get that recorded, and then let people know what's happening. Do not feel like you have to take that on by yourself. If you feel threatened at any point in time, do not take matters into your own hands.
And when you take that first step, like what actually happens? Is there some kind of paperwork that you have that says they should stay away, or do they go to jail, or what's the situation?
Well, usually, and generally speaking, right, every legal system is different depending on your state, right?
Got you,
But
got
you
you.
do want to go ahead and you file a motion for a restraining order. So an officer will usually interview you, and one of those things is they're going to be looking for evidence, right? Because they want to make sure that people are not making false claims, and that's going to be important. So if you have those evidences, if you have like text messages or social media things, you want to bring those things with you. But I can't necessarily, I'm not a law enforcement person, so I don't want to necessarily give advice on that. So, each person would be different. Or if there's questions about it, people can call the non-emergency number without actually filing a complaint and ask the question, that
Yeah.
I'm concerned that someone is violating my boundaries. I've asked them not to call me, not to come to my place of residence, and they're still doing that. I just want to find out what my options are. So before you actually take that step, you can find out what your options are. But I do believe that you should not ignore that, because some people will ignore that and say, well, I think he's just going to go away. I'm just going
Yeah.
to ignore it. I'm going to act like I'm not home. That's where you need to have a strong boundary.
And what about the person that says, well, I don't want to do that because that's going to piss them off?
Well, a lot of people do believe that. They'll think of, again, I don't want to upset that person, but that's where they're putting someone else's well-being before their own. So depending on the scenario, right? Because I don't want to make blanket statements, because everyone's situation is different, but depending on the scenario, making sure that there is accountability for you, especially if you feel like you're threatened, or they threatened you, or that they are potentially, if they have a history of violence. And history of violence doesn't necessarily mean that they physically hit you. That can be a history of violence where they've punched holes in the wall, they've broken things. You were in the bathroom and you were trying to get away from them. They broke down the door, right? Because sometimes people hear domestic violence and they think, well, he never touched me. He doesn't have to touch you. Is there intimidation factor? Were you fearful? Right? There's a lot of times where these situations doesn't necessarily lead to someone physically putting their hands on you. Did they intimidate you? Did they fear? Did they create some type of fear in you? Did they break things in the home? Did they violate your boundaries when you asked them not to come over and they still came over and they started banging on the door? There's a lot of these lesser crimes that occur that we make excuses for. And those are the cases that we should absolutely have some accountability for.
It's so crazy that just resonated with me so much when you say punch the hole in the wall, because I know a lot of people excuse stuff like that.
Yes.
But I know what the whole punched in the wall mean, because I grew up in a domestic violent household. So the holes in the wall, like that was regular, but it was also holes to stomach and shoulders and face, right? So I think so many people take that lightly because they haven't experienced what a bunch of holes in the wall look like. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it kind of just blows my mind, the things that people will excuse. Are there any other, because the hole in the wall one is just like one that I just know very familiar. I'm very familiar with that one. But is there any other ones like the hole in the wall that you see people regularly ignore as, hey, he or she was just frustrated, or he or she, just had to let some anger out?
Well, this would probably be a whole nother show, but the number one thing that I see people ignoring is when women are the ones that are actually violent towards their spouses or to their property. She keyed your car, right? Or she's broken something. She threw your clothes out. She blocked the door, didn't let you leave, because those are the ones that are not reported. Or he's embarrassed because he's a man. I should be able to take it. I'm strong, right? And these types of things. So those are the ones that are actually not reported, where women are actually the perpetrators of the violence. And there are shows, as we were talking about before we came live, I mean, there are shows that talk about some of these real stories that women are the ones that are violent. But you also have these other situations where, and I think it's important to say, where there's this thing where there is reactive abuse, where she has been a victim of abuse for quite some time, and then she starts reacting back to the abuser, and then the abuser starts looking at, well, see, she's the one that's actually violent. So it gets into these murky waters. But when it looks like men are the actual victims of abuse, it's underreported.
First off, I already know that that's the case, and I didn't think about from the male perspective. I had a situation where a young lady just showed up at my place, and I was kind of a crazy story. It was a young lady I was dealing with, and somehow I don't know how this happened, but she ended up meeting another young lady that I dealt with in the past, and somehow they got to talking, and next thing you know, they end up in front of my place. Right.
The drama begins.
Right. But it was all cool. Right. That was how it was positioned.
Yes.
Me, red alerts just went off everywhere. And I was just like, you gotta go and you gotta go. I'm not having no conversation. Right. Now, when I told my male friends about it, the very first thing all of them said was, hey, was they trying to have a threesome? That was their response. And I'm like, I'm are you crazy? I'm like, they showed up to my place uninvited.
Setting you up.
Right. But that just shows you the male ego and mindset. It was like, this happened somehow. This is sexual. And I'm like, bro, this is complete violation of my privacy and my personal security. So I can see how those types of things would just generally go swept under the rug.
It's that good toxic love, and it was your boys was ready for it.
But and I'm just like, bro, you got to be. And it's like I would have did this, and I'm like, bro, you're crazy.
But you see, I mean, you just proved the point, right? Yes. And that we minimize women's bad behavior.
Right.
We make excuses for it, or you sexualize it and you try to turn it around to make a different narrative.
Exactly.
And those types of things continue on until something happens. And it's not necessarily, we're talking primarily that women are the victims, but men are the victims as well.
So you know what? Let's actually see if we could bring somebody else up here this time. Hopefully it works. I got the anonymous Joy here coming up to the stage. So Joy, I'm going to unmute your mic. Well, actually, can you unmute your mic, Joy, so we can actually hear you? And please, can you confirm that you can hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly. Joy, what is up? Can you please give me your age and your question? I'm not going to get your location. I know you want to stay anonymous here, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, can we at least get your age for reference?
Yes, 30.
30.
Was that 30?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Now, can you what exactly made you call in here today? Was it that you actually might be experiencing some yourself, or you know somebody that have?
I am speaking from the perspective of a child whose mom actually was a victim of domestic violence. Unfortunately, when I was a baby, her husband, my dad, he unfortunately killed her during a crime of passion. And that changed the trajectory of my life since they were stationed in Germany at the time. So growing up, I learned about the narrative about how I lost my mom, and I made that not a part of my identity, but like I noticed that I always had a sob story with me before I even, you know what I mean? Like it was part of my story in a way. Growing up, I was raised by my grandmother, and then she passed away, unfortunately, when I was a teenager. So my family, my support, the people that were my rock had passed away at a very young age for me. So I had to learn to be resilient, go to college, etc. And then later on in life, with dating, I met my then boyfriend, who became a rock for me. However, from 17 until I would say 30, 17 until like actually 29, he was my rock. And then with that came me being very dependent on him. And with that, him knowing that he had this,
that power over you?
That power in a way of like going through all my different milestones in life, graduating college, having 2 kids, and me thinking, okay, I'll be secure. And he was a sense of safety. He began to abuse that. And unfortunately, not unfortunately, but thankfully, I was able to leave the situation. And um, basically, I left it because it was escalating to that physical point after having my own mom not be here because she was in a similar situation. So I basically wanted to say to any mothers out there or any women out there who are in a situation like that, where they are going through the cycles of abuse with their boyfriends, husbands, etc. They have kids and they are sick of their kids seeing how they are being abused and how they are being treated, to definitely get your support system in place, come up with a plan, and please leave for your kids.
So
Thank you.
let me confirm this, Joe. I want to ask a few questions if you don't mind, because you were in this relationship between 17 years old all the way up until 29. You guys had 2 kids throughout the duration of this relationship, correct?
Correct.
And when the relationship, when you said abuse started happening, then it turned into physical abuse. What was the abuse before it actually became physical when you said abuse started to happen?
Right. So even while we were young, there were moments where he would be, there were moments of controlling. Like even my family members noticed, like, oh, he's being controlling. Like he'll take my phone and chat, and if I'm speaking with a family member, he'll take the phone and make sure like it's really a family member. Like little things like that. That at a young age, and you're a little naive to. You might think like, oh, he loved me. He, doing all this extra, but those moments like when it was good, it was really, really good. And so that's what kind of kept me in it, because I was, one, dependent on him, and two, there were moments when things were really good. Everybody like liked him, our families like got along, and that really um, you know made you feel like, okay, maybe we'll get through it, maybe it's just a phase. But then after forgiving and forgiving and forgiving, they, for him, it wasn't, oh, forgiving, let me be better. It was, okay, she forgave me, so it's more like permission. And so
Yeah.
that's when things started to escalate to a point where it's like, I need to get out now.
And when it got abusive, like physically abusive, how bad was it? Like was
It started off small, like if we're arguing, and then he'll choke me, and I'll leave and go to a family member's house or something like that, and days will go by and you come back and it starts to slowly, like, you think it's not going to happen again. And then just little things like, if you're playing or something, or he'll hit and then you hit back, you'll hit harder, like kind of like how she was saying, the threshold of tolerance started to slowly decline. Like it started to slowly, like it'll go from like point A to B to point Z unprovoked at sometimes. And so that's when it was like, okay, there's something else going on here.
Joy, man, thank you so much for coming up here and sharing with the audience, because believe it or not, your testimony might have just freed somebody else on this call here, because you'll be surprised with how many people are, going through this situation right now.
Facts.
And, you was in that situation from 17 to 29.
Yes. And so now I'm learning how to stand on my own, for one, like financially, take care of everything, take care of my children, and then learn how to heal myself and make sure, like, basically my whole mindset right now. And the reason why I will never go back to that situation is because I have, one, example, my mom, of what happens if you stay in that situation. And two, I don't want my 2 kids to see, okay, well, mom, you went back to that, so they think that that's okay in the future if they ever, with their partners or whatever. Like, I don't ever want them to think like that was acceptable, or what mommy went through is acceptable. Like their tolerance is a whole different level than what I was. So I just want to set a new pattern, a new level of standard, a new level of expectation of self-love moving forward for my children and their children.
Boom. Well, listen, I love that, Joy. Make sure you do
Right.
it here with us. As a matter of fact, we want to stay tuned into this story here. I want to see how it progresses and how that next relationship unfolds for you. So please keep us abreast at info@hardlyinitiated.com, or you could just come back up here and kick it with us on the next initiation hotline. But I'm absolutely blessed to be able to speak to you, and you have a good day. Okay, Joy?
You too. Thank you. Bye,
I
guys.
see a few things
Of
to Joy
course.
if she's listening.
Absolutely.
First, Joy, I want to thank you for calling in and being brave and sharing your story, because your story matters. And there's some key hallmarks that you shared that I want to share with the audience, because I do think it's important. What Joy shared was she had a trauma, a deep trauma that occurred in her life that resulted in a maternal loss. And when she also mentioned she became dependent on the relationship. When we
Right.
have these deep losses, especially from an early age, when we don't understand how it changes us as she does, how it changes you, many women in particular that have unhealed trauma where there's been a loss, is that there can be a looking for that loss, that love that was lost, that should have been that healthiness from a mom, that protector, that guidance, that love and that nurture, is that we can try to find it in the bed with men. And that's where that codependency and these dependency type things can come into play, because then you try to make that person your everything. You make them your mom, your dad, your lover, your pastor, your best friend, all these types of things. And then it comes to this place where when things happen, there's not necessarily a healthy barrier, because we're bonding with people from a pain point. So as she mentioned, she has an understanding of her history. And especially if someone has lost, a woman has lost their mom, there's a book called Mother Hunger by Kelly McDaniels. And it talks about that mother figure for men and women, but in particular, her book is for women, and how that affects our choices in relationship, because it is deep, it's generational, and it's important for us to understand, especially if we're a woman, the dynamics of the women in our family, because that are the shoulders of what we're standing upon. And as Joy just mentioned, she went through that situation, and now she's breaking the generational trauma, and now she's creating a different path. So thank you, Joy, for sharing that, because I do believe it was very powerful. It's important to say that there are resources available for women in particular if they've lost their mom, especially to violence.
So, how likely is it that you will be someone to experience domestic violence if you grew up in a household where you saw that happening as the norm? Does the likelihood that this is going to be your reality go up tremendously?
It will affect you. So it's about how it's going to affect you, because that's a deep vulnerability. And if you're not aware of it, most people will think they're going to run away from it. But if they have not necessarily integrated their wounds into their life, they're going to run exactly to it. They potentially have a higher percentage to become the person who perpetrates violence because they don't want it to happen. So then they're reactive to it.
Wow.
Or potentially it can appear in their relationship in other ways. It may not be exactly how you witnessed it, but let's say if you don't understand it, and you don't understand having good boundaries, self-esteem, and all those other things, then Ryan can easily attract that into his relationships with women. And that means that sometimes we can ignore those early signs before it actually gets to that place. So that's why it's so important for us to understand we have to have that PhD in our own history. And if you have access to the history of your parents, because sometimes things are not taught, they're caught. We're going to catch the energy, we're going to catch the things in our households versus things that are said. Or we're all running from something or running to something. And sometimes from those violent situations, we think we're running from it, but we can be running right to it if we don't understand it and if we haven't taken the time to do our own work.
And you said this happens to the person that doesn't integrate their wounds into their life.
Because it's so painful. Sometimes things that happen in our past are so painful, we just try to bury it and put it behind us. But it
Gotcha.
will come out in your life one way or the other. It's going to come out. So if we can't even speak about that pain, and I understand why Joy would be anonymous, right? Because she has kids and other types of things. But if we can't speak the pain in a way that we no longer are falling apart, we have to fall apart before we build ourselves back together. But if we can't even, there are people that when I meet them, they can't even speak the pain that they went through because it's still painful 20 years later. And when that happens, that means that that's exactly where they need to heal. So when you think about all the people that are listening or that are going to watch the replay, if there's something in their history that they still haven't shared, or it's so painful that they are afraid to share because they feel like they're going to fall apart, that is the very thing that they need to heal. Like as you share your story about, with the previous women, those types of things, that you're able to share that now because it's a lesson, right? It's a lesson that was learned versus something that has to, because things will continue to repeat. The same thing that we need to learn will continue to show up in our life over and over and over again because there's a lesson, there's something that we need to learn. So as older as people get, they can look back and see the patterns in their life, because sometimes, especially from a relationship standpoint, it can be Bob or John or Ryan or whoever the person may be, but you still feel the same exact way with that person. They're just a different person, right? So it could be you, and it can also be that you're attracting the same thing that what you need to heal from. It could be a combination of a lot of different things. We need to pay attention to that. So I think Joy's story is beautiful.
Right.
And I think she's probably inspired a lot of different people, because it may not necessarily be they themselves have experienced it, but they could have been a family member. It could have been a cousin. It could have been a friend. It could have been someone that they've known. And there's vicarious trauma that happens where the trauma didn't happen to us. Like, as you shared, beautifully with your own story, you were in a household. So there's vicarious trauma. So sometimes we can act as if it happened directly to us because we were exposed to it repetitively.
Wow. So guys, listen, because of the nature of the conversation, we put the link in there. If anybody else wants to come in, I'll allow one more conversation to take place. But check this out here. I need everybody to do me a favor and go ahead and smash that gray like button. Go ahead and give us that thumbs up there so you can go ahead and support the channel. We really, really need you to give us that thumbs up. And I actually want to go ahead.
I'm just blown away by her story, though. She was 12 years.
Yes.
12
years, and with kids from the relationship.
Yes.
It's just like you can really be trapped.
Most women will shield their kids, and they truly believe, and this is no judgment, I understand why people do it. People will shield their kids thinking they are doing them a favor. They think that because their kids don't see it or experience it, well, I can take it, I'm the woman, and they will shield them. But that also will lead other ways of which their kids can be traumatized. They don't have a mom who's present. She's preoccupied. She's in survival mode. So we can still pass down generational trauma, not in the very way that we were traumatized, but we still pass it down in other ways. But it's not easy just to walk out the door once you know there's a problem. Many people like Joy, they know way before they even made a plan to leave that they need to leave. But the reason why people keep coming back is what we just heard in her testimony, is they don't have a plan. They don't have a support system. So the very place that they're dependent on is the very place they're going to come back, especially if you have children. So you have to be very strategic, and they have to make that plan before they ever leave. But they can't do that just on their own. And we know that.
It's so crazy. It's so tricky thinking about that too, because the kids are really impacted.
Yes.
I remember when I was in second grade, and I remember showing up to school, and it was like the first day of school. And I remember it's so crazy. This show be bringing up all kind of stuff. So I remember it being the first day of school, and I'm at the bathroom, and I remember the teacher that was chaperoning us to the restroom went, because it's like private schools, it's everybody in line going to the restroom type of deal. And I remember my teacher at the time got pulled to the side by an assistant principal. And I remember overhearing them talking about me, saying, "Hey, look, Ryan, they got a bunch of stuff going on. Just talk to his mom, he can be really sensitive." And I remember overhearing that, and I remember being so insulted by that. I'm second grade. I'm sensitive? What the hell? What? But when I look back on it, I was really sensitive. I was arguing with kids. If I would get a bad grade, I would be straight. It would be I would stop doing work. If I found out I got a bad grade at the top of the day, all of a sudden for the rest of the day, I'm not doing nothing. I'm being extremely callous and disrespectful to the teachers. When I look back on that, that was a very trying time for me. But it's kind of crazy, because now when I as I got older, I realized why I was like that. Because it was just so much that I was angry and frustrated about at home. And I never had that conversation with my mom even about that, and kind of overhearing that. And of course, my teachers didn't necessarily communicate everything that was going on in school about that, because I still was, at the end of the day, a high achiever, right? So the impact that abuse have on your kids is so incredible, right? It's so massive, and a parent wouldn't even understand exactly what's happening because they're not living your life. So if you are in that situation and you got kids, it's you just have to know whether you think the kids see it or however you think they're being affected, is literally times 100.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just imagine just sharing your story. If you didn't do your work and if you didn't have a growth mindset, you can just take that label on. And it's
Right.
kind of like you would stuff down all the stuff that contributed and just say, well, I was just a bad kid. I was just an angry kid. You know how
Right.
many people use that label because they don't want to open up that wound to actually, and it's never to blame our parents. It's to understand our own history. Like when we go to Italy, we open these books and we're learning about the history of all these monuments. It's to understand what was there and what we're looking at. So when we look at the same thing with our life, it's not that, yes, our parents had their own wounds. They did the best that they can, all the things, but we have to look at that because that does affect us, especially the labels, the narratives that we tell ourselves. And there are things that happen that we can keep that same cycle. So that anger and the things that have happened that you were kind of, using the word that people were saying you were sensitive or you had a low threshold or a tolerance that you were acting it out. When bad things happen to us as kids, it's going to come out of that. But when we learn to hide and we learn to keep family secrets, then we just label that there's something wrong with us. And then we go ahead and we take that message on until something happens where we're either going to repeat the same cycle or you don't let people get as close to you because that's vulnerability. They get close to you. If people really know me, they won't like me. And then you tell yourself these narratives that keep you reserved, that keep you guarded, especially for men. Then you're not as vulnerable because you're never going to let somebody hurt you like that again. But when you break through that, as you have and as you are, sounds like, then you get more of a growth mindset. You're able to speak your story with no shame. And even if there were emotions coming up, that means that you have empathy for that little second grader that heard that conversation because he's still in there.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And I think the big way we got to break through too is just make sure we don't make that dysfunctional household we may have grown up in normal to us, because a lot of us have, well, whether that be through, you got to heal, you figured a way to laugh it out with your siblings. You laugh about that time that mama stabbed, got so mad at the husband, she found out, he cheated, so she stabbed him.
Yeah.
And
true.
he went back to the hospital
Right.
and he patched them and they came back in and they was eating dinner by the night. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Those little ratchet family stories and things that we figured out. Because you don't even know that if you've normalized it, that it might be something that you need to deal with.
And I like to give out resources. There literally is a book called The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate. And he talks about this, how we have normalized dysfunction, to your point, by creating certain narratives around it, that it kind of gets into our nervous system. So then when it happens to us, we've been normalizing it way before we've even accepted it. Because of the things that are passed down. Yeah, it's okay to laugh about these jokes, but if you get to a place where you're covering up and you see that that's the family system, then you don't want to have to go home to Thanksgiving, especially if something happened to you, and pass the peace to someone who's hurt you to satisfy the collective of the family, because you don't want to disrupt the apple cart. The way that we change our generations and we break free is we are someone who speaks out. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be an aggressor, but you have boundaries, that you don't have to make the decisions based off of family history. But that means that you're going to have to take some risk and people are not going to like you. And we're in a culture where we want people to like us. We want validation. So if you go against Big Mama and she wants you to be next to the uncle who's hurt you or who stabbed the aunt or all these other types of things and you don't feel comfortable with, by you saying no, you're going to either get guilted, you're going to get shamed, or you're going to do these other types of things. So it really takes a person to really be strong to have boundaries.
Yes.
Instead of just going with the flow.
And we're going to take this last anonymous caller that we have in here before we move to our next segment. So I'm bringing you here to the stage. Anonymous caller, can you please unmute your mic so we can hear you speak? Welcome to Hardly Initiated.
Hi.
Hey,
what's
how
up?
are
What's
you?
up?
Hello.
How am I? I'm nervous. That's how I am. But
Listen, don't be nervous. We're excited to hear from you.
And listen,
Yes.
I know you're anonymous, so I'm not going to ask you for your age or your your name or your location, but do you mind giving your age?
yes, I'm 32.
Awesome. Okay. So let me know why you called in here today.
Well, I saw the title, Crimes of Passion, and I haven't had a crime of passion, thank God, but I might have one because of a situation that I was recently involved in. So let me just get to the point. So I had an affair with a married guy, and we really had an attachment to each other. And I know it was wrong. I'm not one of those women who's like, oh, I love him. No, it was wrong. He doesn't want me. I know what it was, right? But we did have an attachment because his marriage was not going well from what he shared with me. And um, his wife wasn't pleasing him sexually. He told me all of these things. He even went as far, which I think was wrong, to tell me that his wife was molested when she was younger, and that's why sex with her is not pleasant. So, long story short, he told me this whole sob story. We slept together and we got attached, but he broke it off and he said, we can't do this anymore. And initially, it kind of hurt because I was in a low place at the time, if I'm honest, which is why I did it in the first place, which is why now I can acknowledge that it was wrong because of where I was at the time. But to get to the point, so he broke it off and he told me that he told her everything about us and that he didn't reveal my name, but he told her that we had an affair or he had an affair with someone, but he didn't say who. And she said, well, you better not let me find out who it is or it's going to be a triple homicide. I'm going to kill you, her, and myself. But
he said that.
he told me that that's what she said. But this is the whole cherry on top, if you will. I realized it was all a lie. He didn't tell her anything. And I know for a fact that he didn't because when we had the affair, she was pregnant and it was a high risk pregnancy. So I know that he didn't tell her that he cheated on her while she was pregnant. Um, Now, obviously, I don't have concrete proof, but I'm putting it together and it doesn't make sense. So to get to the point of my question is, because he lied about all of this and I feel terrible, do you think that I should say something to her or I should keep myself safe and not say anything? I mean, maybe it sounds like a no-brainer, but because he's just such a liar, that's why I feel like he should be exposed because he tried to make it seem like he was being a good guy and telling the truth, but he was just lying about everything.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, thank you so much for calling and sharing your story because your story is many people's stories, right? There's a lot of what we call triangle type relationships where there's an affair, and there's literally a term that we call Cartman's triangle. Cartman's triangle is where there's someone that positions themselves as the victim, as he did, and he will share the sob story to get her to rescue him, and then his wife was the perpetrator. So we kind of look at these triangle type relationships that occur. But without knowing all the details, my suggestion would be is to take care of yourself and remove yourself from the situation and question your intentionality. Right. Because sometimes when we look at these situations where we want to expose someone because they hurt us and we want to teach them a lesson, these types of things can cause more pain for you. So you really want to think about your decision making when it comes to this. And my suggestion would be is to first take care of yourself and get into a place of healing. And later on, if you wanted to make that decision, then you're in a place where you're not making it from a reactionary standpoint. You're responding to a situation. But I would pretty much get to a place where you have support, you cut off all contact, and you go through a detox period and not speak to this person for quite some time and not even give them access. And then you're in a better position to make a decision for yourself that's coming from a logical position and not where you're in a place of pain or reactionary decision making. But what she shared is many people's story because crimes of passion do come from these situations where these are the stories that are untold, where you find out your spouse is cheating. And, to your point earlier, Tyshawn, sometimes we hear these stories, we laugh about them, or it's the stuff that entertains us from movies. But this is people's lives. So I would suggest for her to just take care of herself and take care of her safety. And it's going to be painful because regardless of the situation, this was someone that she had an attachment to. So it's going to take time to unattach and to get to that place where you can think clearly to make decision making. So without knowing all the details, I would suggest is taking care of yourself and removing yourself from the equation.
I like that. And that you said it's the Cartman triangle.
Cartman's triangle, right? So that's our psychology term for it. But to drama triangle is another way to kind of plainly say it, where there is a triangle, especially in these affair relationships, where the person who has the most power positions themselves as the victim. and in this case having 2 women. So you're going to make your wife the bad guy. She's not doing all these other things. But another statistic, and she just kind of shared that in her testimony to us without knowing, the most vulnerable time for an unstable relationship is around that first child, when affairs occur and betrayals occur, because there is a shifting of focus that occurs, especially around that first child. So we want to be careful.
That leaves you more susceptible to betrayal.
To affairs and betrayal, absolutely.
It's not their first child, though.
Well,
It's not their first child.
Let me tell you, I'm telling. I hope that you were able to really take this, information I was provided to you, because I want to make sure that you position yourself to be as safe as possible.
Yes, please.
And listen, revenge ain't always,
sweet.
It ain't always sweet.
Because that guy, he said to say, because that's kind of weird, right? He said that the triple homicide, I mean, to even verbalize that.
Well, the way that I heard that was, and I'm making assumption, the way that I heard that was manipulation. It's to keep her away, right?
Yes.
To keep her not to going to the wife. It's to control her, right?
Yes.
So to the extreme, that's how I would hear that. He was manipulating her, and she can read through that. That's why.
Yes, and that's why it hurts, because he didn't have to go to that extent and lie and go that far. I had already backed away. I wasn't trying to ruin his marriage.
That is,
well, you know what? Look,
control.
Thank you so much for coming up here and telling your story. I appreciate that. Okay,
thank you.
Thank you.
Oh man, it's
I can't believe. I guess people say anything when they get in situations where they don't want to be
to
exposed.
hide and to cover up and to lie, especially in some of these affair situations. It becomes the norm. They get used to lying and hiding and covering up, and then it becomes second nature to them. So whatever they're saying, they don't even realize the impact that they're having. Like, this young lady was probably in this relationship because she believed everything that he said.
Right.
And he pulled the wool over her eyes. So of course it's going to be hurtful. And of course it's going to change her life. And he wants to control the narrative. Of course he doesn't want his wife because he wants to have his foot in 2 different worlds. It's called a double life, right? So I'm going to probably suggest that this probably was not his first rodeo.
I can't stand infidelity in general, but it's something in particular that I hate. I just think it's just the ultimate low when you really just start bashing your spouse to somebody else. I just think that's just like, there's a level of disgust behind that.
No loyalty.
It's just, oh man, it's like the lowest levels of loyalty in that. And I mean, as you can see, I mean, like, it's not even safe. Like, you can see how this young lady here, and we talked about that in the episode that we just actually released this past Sunday, but you think you're getting this reprieve, in this outside relationship. You think you're doing something to, re-energize yourself or whatever you think you're getting from this place. And it feels good, but as soon as it goes bad, it can ruin everything, because this young lady has feelings.
Yes.
Now,
right?
okay. Now the young lady who called in, because like you said, she has feelings. So clearly seems like she's really at the edge of making a decision if she should get herself involved in this thing. If somebody chooses to do that, to be the person that exposes the whole situation, could that potentially be the catalyst to a potential crime of passion?
Absolutely, because I'm making assumptions, not knowing all the moving parts. But if this man has been in control, he has his wife and he has his kids, he has his mistress over here, and sometimes the mistress is keeping, right, unknowingly keeping him there. And then now you're going to blow up his world, and he does not see a way out of that blowing up of the world. He's going to go and try to potentially hurt the person who is causing the problem. Sometimes we'll first see denial, the lie, or she's crazy, I don't know her. They'll continue to stay with the lie. But sometimes when they cannot anymore, or when they see that they're truly going to be exposed, especially if they have other things that are part of their life ahead of time, then he potentially could absolutely potentially hurt her.
I could see that too, because at that point, and you let me know if this is the right frame of thinking, but that person is really choosing between them having a life and you having a life. And that's the decision that they feel that they're in, which is why they decide to potentially take your life.
In that moment, there's no logical thinking. So when people are going to do some type of harm, they're not thinking through the consequences of what's going to happen. Like, I'm going to go to jail, and like essentially I'm trying to get rid of the problem, but I'm creating the problem, and I'm trying to not have her blow up my family, but I'm blowing up my own family. Right. So people that have that type of mindset, they're not thinking through their consequences in particular. But let me say that every person that has an affair doesn't necessarily cause type of harm in that standpoint, because there are lots of people that have affairs that their spouse never finds out because, as I'm suggesting for her just to take care of herself, because his wife may never find out. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it may not find out with her, because they usually are repeat offenders, especially if they get away with it.
Yeah, I can see that. And you don't even want to get yourself further involved with this person, because who knows where that's going to go, because you have no control of the situation.
The best revenge is for her to take care of herself and become very successful in her life and be happy and peaceful and walk with that.
I like that. And stop dating married men. Okay. PSA, ladies, it's rarely ever going to turn out good for you to date a married man. In fact, I think it's asinine to be upset that the man lied to you when he's lying to the woman he gave a whole life commitment to, and he's betraying her right to your face, and you expect loyalty from this man. He's already proven to have a lack of character to even be in this relationship with you. So, I mean, in my opinion, to expect integrity from this brother in the midst of this affair.
Now that's very silly. Logical. That's very logical thinking. Tyshawn is given. So that's why we got the doctor.
Yeah. So what I would say to that is, it's easy to say that, but when we kind of break down some of these cases, sometimes, and think about this from a very basic standpoint, people lie. They'll say, well, we're getting a divorce, or I'm just staying in the house for the kids. I hear these stories so many times from clients where they are already attached before they find out that the person is actually not planning on leaving and it was just lying to them, which I'm assuming maybe was part of this case. But then what happens is when they find out, the person still keeps the lie, and they're getting enough, they're getting enough from this relationship that keeps them intact. And usually it's the hope of the outcome of the future, because there's a fantasy that's involved with affairs. It's in a bubble. It's secrecy. Yeah. The sex is usually hot, right? It's all these thrills. Yeah. It makes you feel energized, alive, and all these other types of things. And the fact that I'm talking from an unconscious level, that someone is going to choose you. You hang on to the hope that they are going to choose you, potentially is trying to heal something in your past of not being chosen. Not being seen, being unseen as a child, especially if it's not healed, causes a lot of people to enter into these relationships, to Tyshawn's point, that we can sit here and logically judge,
right?
But until you're in that situation with all your pain, you're bleeding metaphorically, and you have yet to deal with the situation of being unseen, because that man, when they're in their bubble, he sees her. He sees her. She feels alive. She feels desired. She feels all those other things. So she's able to put in the back of her mind that he has a wife and kids, because she's hoping that one day that he will be the image that she has in her mind. And what happens in these types of relationships is you're constantly trying to get the reality to match the fantasy and the image in your mind, which keeps people there a lot longer, because only if he matches that, then there's this unconsciousness that I'll be seen, I'm chosen, I'm loved. And we know it's dysfunctional, but that's what keeps people in these relationships.
And if that's the exception, if he did say, hey, I'm going through a divorce right now and so on and so forth, I get it. But she didn't really clearly say that. So I think it's safe to assume, because I think there's also a group of women who know that a man is in a straight up marriage and is leaving and moving around, and they just okay with that situation.
It makes them more attractive from a dysfunctional standpoint, that he's married and I can get your husband, or I can get your person, whatever it may be, because they can go in and get what they need and they can leave. They know he's going home and he's not trying to stay with them. And we know that this is dysfunction, but to your point, there are women that have an avoidant attachment style where they're not necessarily looking for vulnerable, emotional, but they are looking for the thrill of it.
Man. So listen, I mean, I ain't gonna lie, because that call just really hit me. I'm gonna take one more anonymous call for the night, y'all.
The anonymous calls this evening have been tremendous. Very like the vulnerability that's being shared.
Powerful when people share their story. They share their story so they can inspire other people to share theirs, and there's no shame. And
now it looks like we're bringing, I hope I'm pronouncing it right here, but it looks like Amor Key here to the stage. Did I pronounce that name right?
Yeah.
Okay, so wait, you said I did pronounce it right? Yes?
No, you pronounced it right.
Excellent.
Don't be pronouncing my name because it's supposed to be anonymous.
Hey, so listen, could you please go ahead? We're going to keep this anonymous here, but if you can you please tell me your age?
So I'm 28.
Okay.
28
years old. I'm very interested to know why you called up here today.
So oh God, I'm nervous. Um,
Nervous.
I just went through the most traumatic time of my life this year.
Mm.
Um, I'm a mother of three. Um, just to kind of give you a backstory, I have two older boys, and I was in a long term relationship with their father that unfortunately ended. We're in a good place. We never really had any uh abuse or anything going on with that relationship. We just decided to end the relationship, and it's been good. Um, Years later, I started dating my daughter's father. My daughter is 11 months now. I started dating him, and we were dating for a while. Got pregnant, and let's just say things just started escalating fast. That's when I started kind of looking up terms like narcissist, love bombing, things of that nature, because I had ended up moving in with them, my children, and I started noticing he was kind of off in the things he would say, how aggressive he would get sometime. Uh, Maybe because I don't know, it could be anything that would happen. He'll kind of like, oh, for instance, we were watching a movie one day, and I was like, oh my God, that man is so bow legged. And when I say the whole mood for the night had changed, I'm like, wow, like I just said the man was bow legged on TV, like things like that. I've never really been with a jealous man. Like when I was with my boy's father, I modeled, I act. He didn't have a problem with me doing any of those things. So it was all really new and shocking to me because the guy that he presented the guy he presented himself to be in the beginning just was so passionate and
More, hold on, wait. Quick question, because I want to know this. Did this eventually relationship end up leading to any level of physical abuse after you started seeing those signs?
yes, it did. Yes, it did. He ended up going through my phone one night and he saw an old video of me and my ex, and I was asleep. I was about what, maybe it. He woke me up, smashed my phone in my face, choked me. Um, he even put a gun up to my head that night. Oh God, I'm so ashamed. I mean, when I look back on things like that, I should have left. I don't know why. Well, you know what? Now I do know why. Because I've been on this self-healing journey for a minute now. Because I'm like, okay, something has to be like deeper, like within me. The reason why I stayed, and I came down to two things. My own self-esteem, and love for myself, and embarrassment. I was in a situation where I was like, okay, well, I don't want
Hold on, wait.
the
More. Your sound is breaking up a little
You
bit.
might be
So,
moving around. You
so
might be
you
moving
got to
around.
stay.
Get into a one spot.
You got to get where
like,
you got the best Wi-Fi. So
I
hold on.
wanted to have my family,
Hold
you
on one
know.
second. One second. One second.
I wanted him
Hold
to
on.
be there to grow up and see.
Amor, can you
You
hear me? The sister's Wi-Fi is not working the best. So what's happening here is
Hey, so
Amor.
I think you might be moving around more. You got to find a good spot. We got the good Wi-Fi.
And Amor, if you can hear me, let me know. If
Oh
not,
God.
can you hear me, Amor? So unfortunately, I'm gonna
I
hold
can
off.
hear you.
Okay, so Amor, hold on. Just hold off real quick because I kind of got the gist of the story at this point. I just want to get
I
some
can hear
context.
you.
Can
Okay.
you just give me a very specific question now at this point? Because now we got good context to the situation. What's your question?
So my question is, how do I move on um from the trauma that he left me in? Um Basically when I had my daughter, um things were still right. My daughter got to 5 months and going to jail because he killed I don't know if I can say
Amor, listen.
he
Your sound
unalived.
Your sound is still going in and out or more. So unfortunately, I gotta remove you because your sound is still going in and out.
And if you could just jump in the chat or more and put that question in there, if that's possible, because I do want to talk about this quite a bit. I got a couple of questions I want to ask you, Dr. Lacy. But yeah, see if Amore could drop that question inside the chat, because her story is definitely compelling and heartfelt. She mentioned a couple things that like that small sign, like the guy getting mad about the movie. Because I've heard that from women before, like a guy will either shut down or just act funny for the remainder of the day, or kind of the time that they experience together. Is that, would you say, a common sign of a guy who's a little bit emotionally unraveled?
Well, I think we would look at that with conjunction of other signs. That in of itself can be just a sign of immaturity, right?
Okay, gotcha.
But I think the key question that I think I heard her say was, how does she move on from experiencing that? And I think that is a key for a lot of people that are listening. How do you move on from a narcissistic, abusive relationship or a toxic relationship? Because even though you're no longer potentially in that relationship, the effects of it are long lasting. Right. There's something that we refer to as the trauma brain, right? Your brain is still going to have euphoric recall, is what we call it. So let's say you're now in a new relationship and someone has some level of resemblance of behavior. You can create a narrative off of that and act as if they were the previous person. So that's why it's important for people to heal from these types of, especially narcissistic, abusive relationships, because sometimes the abuse is not seen, it's felt, and it's carried through that person. So the first important thing is, one, for her calling. That's brave. She shared her story. So there's no shame in that. But what she also said was that there was embarrassment, because when people do, whether it's the violence of him waking up and breaking her phone and putting a gun to her head, even though we can say that you have no reason to be embarrassed, for someone to now call their friend to talk about the person that they're in a relationship had this violent act, sometimes people will convince themselves that, well, maybe it was my fault, or maybe, and then they have this embarrassment where they don't share it. So the first order of business is, especially if there's narcissistic abusive relationship, is I would suggest getting professional help with someone that specializes in toxic, a narcissistic abusive relationship, and take your time. I don't even necessarily put a timeline on, don't date a year, because there's healing doesn't have a timeline. Gotcha. But as long as you're doing the work, there's accountability, and you're able to process how have you changed as a result of that situation, because it still lives inside of her. Regardless of the person not being in her life, she still can have the hypervigilance. She can have the relationship anxiety. There's so many things that can affect a person. And I don't want to necessarily, make specifics to a situation, but the first thing, as I say, is that you do want to heal. And I would come alongside with a professional person. And obviously we know there's podcasts where there's reputable people that specialize in these types of issues. But for her to feel like she's not alone and there's nothing to be embarrassed about, and that there's truly, truly healing, and there's hope for a better future for her and for her kids, for the very fact that she called the show to share her story, because that shows that that's there.
Now, the three young ladies that we actually had an opportunity to speak to, they all had a sexual relationship with the person that they were, describing the situation with. Are there things that a woman or a guy could do before sex comes into play, or like the relationship comes into play, that they can kind of figure out if this person is even capable of some things like that?
Well, when it comes to sex in of itself, I'm not necessarily a believer in a certain time frame, but I do believe that you need to have, once you enter sex into the picture, it's a whole nother ball game, right? As far as attachment and chemistry. But you have to have enough repetitive experiences with this person in different types of settings to see what's consistent and to see what's not. And if we're rushing the relationship and then you're clouded, right, because of the intensity of sex, and we want to make sure that we know that intensity does not mean intimacy. Right? Just because there's intensity of the relationship, that does not mean it's intimate. And a lot of times people, when sex enters the place, for some people, sex can just be like exercise. So let's just be honest about it, right? So to truly have some intimacy, there has to be some emotionality. There has to be some mental connection. And you're truly not going to know that if you're so focused on how fine or whatever it may be, or the chemistry. So slow it down. Whatever that timeline is, slow it down. Have repetitive experiences with that person, see how they respond, see if they have good, healthy relationships that's a red flag. If they don't have good relationships with some of their family members, we understand everyone doesn't necessarily have that, or a good set of friends, and they don't bring you around their friends, and you're constantly like hearing about these ghost people, so to speak. I mean, there's, because when people are narcissistic or have high characteristics of narcissism, they go through people really quickly, because when people get close enough to them, there's a certain threat to them. So they don't have long-term friendships. They have short-term friendships. They may know a person for a year or 2 years, and they may have a buddy right now, but think about their longest term friend. Do they have people that they've been riding with for a while? So there's some things that you can consider, but you don't want to take them and just kind of put them in a silo. There's multiple things that will be present when someone potentially has a propensity towards violent or towards abusive relationships.
Man, that's interesting because, oh man, it's so complex, the things that these relationships and, the ebbs and flows of all the things you can potentially experience. And we didn't get to hear that young lady's, the way that story ended. So I want you to be able to send you
back, because that was,
or just send us. You could also send us the details and the information at info@harleyinitiated.com. We can still take care of it on a read-in, either on this show or another. So just go ahead and send that in to us if you really want to get it taken care of. And now I kind of want to talk about the opposite end of the spectrum a little bit, because we talked about the ladies a lot, but there's a case that you're actually covering right now with Court TV, with a young lady right now that is probably known as Courtney Clenny. And did I pronounce that right?
Yes.
Courtney Clenny. She was well known to be the OnlyFans model who, it seems like she went into business with she went into business with I guess her boyfriend that she was dating, and things went very, very left.
Yes.
As a matter of a fact, we actually got a video that we can play just to give the family a brief intro to the situation, so you guys can get a general understanding. So Delano, can you go ahead and pull that up here, so we can go ahead and give you guys just a general idea of this case before we go ahead and get into it.
I think he dropped a picture.
There we go.
A newly released video allegedly shows OnlyFans model Courtney Clenny attacking her boyfriend Christian Obamselli in an elevator on February 21st. The video allegedly shows Clenny repeatedly pushing her boyfriend and trying to pull his hair. The man, identified as Obamselli, appears to push her back in an apparent attempt to block her attacks. 2 months later, on April 3rd, police responded to an emergency call from Clenny. When they arrived at her Miami condo, police say they found Obamselli stabbed in the shoulder. He was taken to a nearby hospital and later died from his injuries. Clenny's attorney insists the stabbing was in self-defense, stating that Clenny feared for her life during a physical altercation. Friends and family of Obamselli believe differently. "We have no cause to believe that this was a case of self-defense," Obamselli's cousin said. A friend of his said, "We've seen her hit him. I've never seen him hit her." On Wednesday, Clenny was arrested in Hawaii and charged with second-degree murder for the fatal stabbing of Obamselli. She's expected to be extradited to Miami-Dade County to face charges. For the latest developments in this case and all things true crime, stay with Law and Crime Network.
Okay.
That is wild.
So this is now the situation that you said we don't really hear about much, right? Like the guy who's actually being abused in his relationship. And obviously you've been following this case here. So please give us can you fill us in with some details that we might need to know to get context?
Well, again, we know that these are allegations right now. We're getting ready to go to court in 2024. But when we look at these situations that he had documented in his phone, communications with his friends. So if we kind of look at some of the advice we're giving, he was communicating about certain things. When we look at the police reports, we look at the videos, the abuse was Courtney was she was the one that was reacting to the abuse or being abusive. But when we look at the situation, he's not here anymore. So what she's saying is that she was reacting to his being an abusive person, but there's no evidence that has been presented of that yet in these situations. And we can see some of the text messages that are public record between the two of them, of him trying to please her and him trying to make her wishes or things that she was asking him to do to change it, right? So there's a incident that's a public record where he had said hi to a female and she had an explosive reaction to that. And there were many documents between the two of them through their text messages and other types of things, just showing that. So it's showing him as a person that was trying to please his girlfriend, was trying to do all the right things, was trying to love her, but also was very afraid of her because of some of the violence that he reportedly was experiencing, and that was documented through his text messages. But he's no longer here. And then there's things that are documented that show that she kept her videos up on her OnlyFans, which was commercial sex, after he had passed away, and that she was seen partying in Miami and doing other types of things that people will judge and say a normal grieving person shouldn't be doing those types of things, or monetizing off of his death, that after he had passed away, that his the sexual commercial videos that they were making money off of were put on there to continue to make money. So we're looking at this case, and in January, Discovery ID documented this case through a docuseries. So that'll be coming out. I'll be narrating that episode.
Oh, wow.
But what this shows is that, again, these are allegations. It's still going to trial, that men can be the victims of abuse. And that men sometimes do feel like, well, only if I please her, only if I change, or only if I don't share. This is very common. It doesn't necessarily mean it goes to crimes of passion or results in someone's death, but sometimes men or women, but we're talking about men, will withhold information, thinking they're doing themselves a favor because they don't want to cause their person to react or to get her upset. Right. So then in these cases where then they do find out, then there's more reaction. So the best thing of, especially if a man's in a relationship and he feels like he can't have conversations with his girlfriend or his wife, is to be truthful in how you tell things, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to prevent a certain reaction, but you can make it potentially worse. But in this situation in particular, that's what we see as far as the evidence so far, that he was trying to please her and to do all the right things, including not necessarily sharing certain details to protect her. And she's saying that she was defending herself.
I cannot imagine that, being a guy and kind of being in that situation. Well, what was the benefit, or like what was he trying to hold on to stay in a, or I guess in general, like what would a guy be trying to hold on to continue to deal with that kind of abuse?
Well, I think some of the same factors are in place. It just looks a little bit different. We want to believe that he truly believed that he truly loved her, right? So a lot of people will say that, whether it's toxic or not, they truly love this person. So that means that they hold on to the glimpses of the good moments or the good in the person. And we have to look at people as integrated beings. We're not parts. And we hear that often. Well, this person, they're a good person. They have a good heart. They have good traits. Or what we were talking about earlier, they'll say, well, when it's bad, it's bad. And when it's good, it's good. If you find yourself saying those types of things, that is a warning to yourself. If you cannot look at that person as an integrated being, their good parts and their bad parts have to exist in the same place, and you can accept them for that person, then you're off to a good start. But if you're looking at, I'm only holding on to the good parts, and only if I can just fix this bad part, and that's why I'm staying in the relationship, you're setting yourself up for disappointment and for a heartbreak. So there's some assumptions, and that obviously that he's not here to tell his side of the story, but there's some assumptions that he thought he was trying to help her. And sometimes we stay in these toxic relationships because you think you're actually helping the person at the expense of yourself. You will abandon yourself and to try to help the other person.
I can imagine he probably had some aspect of that mindset too, because I think this is something that can be overlooked. But he was featured on her OnlyFans page,
yes,
as the person that she would have sex with.
Yes.
But essentially, that was her OnlyFans page. Like, she was probably making all the money and everything, right? Like, was it any split going on or anything like that?
Well, I don't know the details of they were not business partners. It was her, and he was invited, and he had his own career. And I don't believe that what was reported, he wasn't doing as well, training in cryptocurrency and these types of things. So when he met her at a convention, he was doing very well. And then I believe things change. But in relationships, you hold each other up at a certain point. But this is a good point, that if you are in a relationship and things change and the person starts using the finances to control you, to demean you, especially from a female to a male, that's a warning sign. If you're in a committed relationship, you should be able to hold up each other at different times, including financially, right? So in this case, she was the one that was reported as we want to call it the breadwinner, or was paying for the apartment in Miami and doing all the other types of things because she was bringing in millions of dollars to her OnlyFans account.
I can only imagine how lonely it must have been for him, because I would imagine all the counsel that was coming from his male friends was like, you're crazy. Like, why would you let that girl do that to you? Because I mean, just now me, now understanding how these things work, I would not do that. But had this been before Dr. Lacy and before Harlan initiated, I would have definitely been like, dude, you're crazy. Like it, and I think that's the average male would probably get that same feedback.
Yeah. And when it comes to the sex worker aspect, because she was a sex worker. Dr. Janie, let me know this. Is it possible to have a healthy relationship? And just, if I'm generalizing, am I gonna have a healthy relationship with a woman that's in sex work?
I would say generally it'd be very difficult based off of my experience. And I work with through our Women Redeem program, a lot of women that actually do, whether let's say they were a dentist or an attorney, and then they are now making commercial sex and they're making lots of money. And they do, in their mind, want to find a healthy male that will accept that. And usually the cases when they're coming through our program, it's because they've had more bad experiences trying to have relationships and by having commercial sex. So I would say that the chances of having a healthy relationship will probably be lower unless that person is already in the business with you, which can be a whole nother conversation. But what I find is my women tend to not be truthful in the beginning. They'll use words like I'm a model, or they use other types of things to soften the blow to see if this person's even going to be in their life. But that by that time, then that person can feel like you weren't honest with them.
Right.
So it causes a whole lot of different challenges.
Wait, so I'm thinking about Players Club. I think it was Diamond. She was, going to school and she was stripping to become like a highly paid professional or a sought out professional. But you're saying that women are already this type of professional and are then transitioning to the sex work?
The women that I work with, right? So the challenge that we see is that, let's say you're making six figures and then now you're in commercial sex and you're making seven figures.
Oh.
For most people, it's harder to just remove the moral judgment from their work. It's harder to exit living up to a certain lifestyle and bring in certain income to now go back to a life that you now have experienced something else financially. So there is a conflict where they want healthy relationships. And if there aren't necessarily, like certain people where they're not planning an exit and they're using their money wisely, you get caught in a cycle. It's harder to leave. And that's what we experience with the women that we are working with. It's harder to leave once they get to a certain level.
Man, no, I can see that, because that just it got toxic written all over it. It just does. Even when I remember seeing it pop up on my timeline, the fights, the arguments, the sex working together, you can just imagine. It just seems so unprincipled. I can just imagine just the dynamic of what was going on in the relationship.
It really blows my mind that OnlyFans or sites like that have made sex work more attractive.
They absolutely have. And they have, like, we look at it from a business standpoint, they use funnels. They use Instagram, right? They're an Instagram model where you're following them and liking them. And then you click on the link and it leads you to an OnlyFans page. So they have a business of commercial sex. And they want people to click. Even if you're not buying, they're still counting those clicks. So then what we're also talking about is his question is sometimes people do interrelationships with sex workers and then they try to change them. So if you met her on the pole and you think just for a couple of months, or when things go bad, potentially she may go back to what she knows. So again, you have to accept people for how you met them. And if you think you're going to come in and rescue her and change her and set her, if you're going to accept her from the beginning and not try to change her, then you are working from a place of reality. But if not, then you want to be mindful of the relationship you're ending if you're going to accept all of her.
Wow. So speaking of, taking people how you met them, right? I think about all of the ladies who are currently or have been in an abusive relationship, male or female, where they were forewarned by the lady that came before them about the abusive relationship. So as a woman or a man who's considering a serious long-term relationship, would you advise these people to enter into a relationship with someone or continue a relationship with someone who, although they haven't experienced firsthand the abuse, but they found out some way or another that they had a history of abuse? Would you advise them to take that chance? Or how, if they did want to take that chance, how should they go about making sure that person, won't put them in similar situations?
Well, there's a couple of layers there, right? So the
Okay.
first one is if someone previously is taking the time to go and to warn a new person, you have to question that person's motive, right? So we have to kind of say that. But if the person is known to have a history, then the first thing you want to do, especially if it's an early in the relationship, is ask them about it. Because the other side of that is if someone does have potentially, let's say, an incident, how they have recovered, have they healed, have they had accountability, right? In our counseling center, we have an anger management program, and we also have batterers intervention, right? So their likelihood that when there's a pattern, the past is a good indication of the future. But how someone handles that question, well, you have a reputation, or when I did a background check, I saw that you were arrested for domestic violence.
Right.
How they respond to that will tell you a lot. But if you think that potentially that they're going to change because of all of a sudden that you're the sweetest girl in the world, then you want to set yourself up for potentially illusion of relationship. But I would be careful if someone's reaching back that may come from a place of bitter or anger to kind of warn you
Okay.
because they think they're saving you, right? Because that can be a sabotaging situation. But if there is a reputation, to not ignore it. You want to be precautious, you want to move slowly, and potentially, depending on the situation, ask them about it and be honest. As I did a background check and I saw that, you have a domestic violence on your record, and see how they respond to that. Because just because those things there doesn't necessarily mean all men are bad or the person that has it. There could have been something that happened. There could be context to it, in all fairness. Right. So we want to be careful not to judge people. But if there is something that is causing you to take heed, is I would take heed and move slowly.
I love it. I love it. Dr. Janie, Lacy, people. Yes. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for this game that you are providing and have provided
Absolutely.
here for us tonight. You done saved somebody in here,
so.
because this is a very relevant and important message, as you guys can see, for both men and women, as far as talking about how we can just generally protect ourselves. You did say that one of the number one things we can do is keep a good community around us. Is there anything just off the top of your head for somebody that might be dealing with this or know somebody that is? What do they need to do outside? Is there anything outside of the community, or is that the one thing they need to focus on?
Well, this would be a whole nother show. But generally speaking, be a
Yeah.
good steward of your single season. If you are a good steward of your single season and you're taking care of yourself, using this time to learn, get that PhD in your own history, then you're setting yourself up for greater potential for success. But the other side of it is, if you find yourself in a situation, is to reach out and get help before you make any rational decisions. Before you take a step, before you plan to leave, get someone around you who has an objectivity that can help you make a plan to exit, because the most dangerous time is exiting a dangerous situation. But if you have a friend or a family who you believe potentially is in a domestically violent relationship or an abusive relationship, is to, as Ryan was saying earlier, don't just go and judge them. Like, man, I want to take care. Don't remove that. Be a safe place for them. When we are a safe place for people, when people feel like they can share and we're not judging them, but that means we have to be mature. It takes mature people to be alongside someone to make them safe. So open up to someone, but then ask them. And then there's other things that you can do. They can have a code word. You can have a plan with your friend. If she doesn't feel safe, have a bag packed. But you have to do this very strategically and with a professional or someone who's safe, because irrational decisions is where a lot of the impulse violence can occur. So to not ignore it, check in with her, stay consistent, especially if she's not answering the phone or she's too busy, because sometimes there could be control on the other side. Is not put anything writing. Don't ask her in a text message. Have those conversations face to face, and stay consistent in her life, whatever that may be. Even if it's an inspirational quote that you're sending her through text message, just in case someone is picking up her phone and reading it, making it as safe and non-threatening as possible. When you're face to face, ask her from a place of love and not a place of judgment. How can I best be there for you? I'm concerned. I'm not hearing from you. I've been noticing bruises on your arms, or I notice that you get very anxious when your husband or your boyfriend is around, and I love you and I care for you, and I'm just wondering how I can support you. She may not even in that moment give you a suggestion or say anything, but you just opened the door a little bit for her to not be ashamed about it. And that's
Yeah.
the first step.
No, listen, that's great insight. Actually, it's funny that you reminded me of the episode we had Dr. Spirit on here. And it was a young lady that told her she was experiencing some things of the sort. and she actually said she was going to send her email, but it was like this coded email, like
Pizza.
something about what size pizza do
Okay.
you want or something like that. And I didn't even think that, wow, because this person might be checking emails and
Then
checking
look at your
phones
phone,
and
checking emails,
doing these types
everything.
of things. So you got to even think about, as a good friend, to wisely and strategically approach this, you know, if it's even at that level, which is scary to think about it even being at that level, but that's just really the reality of the situation.
There's
But
been cases of like hidden cameras and stuff, you know.
Oh yeah, there's
spouses
so
doing
many
all
ways
that.
to spy on your spouse
Yeah.
today.
oh man, but look, thank you again so much, Dr. Janie Lacy. Is my favorite part here. In fact, we're gonna do some special for the initiates that are still in here. So Ryan, let's do a giveaway for the people, man.
So check this out, guys. We actually had a really great episode. This was this past Sunday, and then we dropped the episode special for the fellas. So we had
We
an episode
did.
with Paul Williams, okay? Overcoming trust issues, work husbands, healing from infidelity. So this was a really great episode. The fellas, we already been looking at the analytics, of course. More fellas are tuning into this episode than ever.
Yeah.
And I think the fellas was really looking for a safe space, really, to kind of have themselves be heard and kind of get some counsel on these things.
Yeah.
So I really want you guys to watch that. But this is the thing. Paul did us a favor. He dropped off 4 books that he says, when we say, are only for the initiates. Okay. So he dropped this book. This is Dear Future Wife. Okay. It's a man's guide and a woman's reference to healthy relationships. So we got 4 books. The only thing you got to do, guys, is email us. Send us over that email at info@HardlyInitiated. Do us a favor. Go ahead and throw in your address to your physical address where you actually want the book to be mailed. That way to cut down some correspondence from us, and we can pick the names, initiates only, because we cross-referencing with our list of initiates, and we're going to send that book out to you this week. In fact, y'all hurry up and send me an email. We'll make sure we get the books out by Tuesday afternoon.
As a matter of fact, and I want to get it to some brothers too. All right. So go ahead, brothers, go ahead and shoot us that email. All right. Don't let the ladies beat you out. They be fast on that email. We probably got some emails already.
Emails right now. No joke.
All right. That's how it be.
Yeah.
But go ahead. I want to get this game out to the fellas, man. We got 4 signed copies here just for you guys,
And
for
of
the
course,
family.
Of course, y'all got to send us a photo when you get the book, though. So shout out to Selena Hill, one of our beautiful and lovely initiates. Well, she was the very first to be featured on the show. We dropped that photo, which was dope. So shout out to her for participation. But guys, more and more and more, we're going to be doing some very creative things. We're going to move from the books to gift cards and so much more. So just hold tight, and make sure you do this. Send us your email. We're going to get the books out to you.
Yeah. So by the way, initiates, anytime you may have ran into another initiate, you may have received a giveaway offer, something just great overall happened where you want to send in a photo, just send it over to info@hardlyinitiated.com. We want to start featuring your wins and successes on the platform here. So make sure you go ahead and get that joint over to us.
Shirts on the way, Teresa. No shirts yet. Shirts on the way.
Yes. And we got to let y'all know. All right. Because listen, I told you, we going to the next level.
Yeah.
Conversations like this, I told you, we touching the spectrum of conversations here because this is relevant to somebody here that is in the family. And on Wednesday, we have a very special show coming up on Wednesday. We have never, ever
Hey, that book
had
is
Tim Ross here on the live show, but Tim Ross is coming back and in a very different fashion.
Yes, it's gonna be incredible. So we actually got it's more of a what would you call it, like a state of the address. We addressing all types of things, relationships.
I'm gonna
it's
tell
about
you,
to really get crazy.
We bring in two very different people to the platform on Wednesday. And we're gonna have a show that we've never had. We've never had this kind of show before. But Tim Ross is gonna be literally here in Hardly Initiated Studios. And it is going to be something that you guys have never experienced. I can guarantee you've never experienced what we're doing on Wednesday. So you have to be here Wednesday. Matter of fact, be here at 7:55. All right, be here 5 minutes early. All right, because this one here is really going to shake the earth.
Yeah, we never did an episode like this before, so it's gonna be good.
We have not, but we always want to keep y'all up here. It's so much going on. Ryan, do we got anybody that we need to go ahead and shout out or tell the people before we get up out of here?
Yeah, just real quick. Shout out to Nzinga for sending over that super chat, always showing love. She usually like to close us out with a nice, healthy super chat. So shout out
Much
to
love,
Nzinga. And really shout out to everybody that's been tuning into us and sharing us. I told y'all guys, we're about 20 members away from 1,000 initiates for the channel membership and over well over 200,000 subscribers right now. So it's really going crazy. Essence Atkins, man, I did not know that video was going to do such incredible numbers. I think she's almost at 700,000 views. I'm pretty sure that Essence will be our first million view episode, which will be incredible. She's been going viral on all of the platforms
People
from her
love
content. So make sure you tune into that episode if you haven't, and let us know. Send us an email. Let us know how you feel about this episode as well, because Dr. Janie brought a very different type of vibe tonight. I think this is really cool because the way you present the information to us is just smooth. It's smooth, Dr. Lacy. And the thing is, the way you communicate with the solutions, I think is very empathetic. Is you can tell you got tons of experience with this, and it's just such solid counsel. And the thing is, I know it's solid counsel because we wouldn't get the compelling stories and heartfelt stories that we got over the phone lines today without them trusting that they're going to get the right feedback after sharing those stories. So we really appreciate you.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to be here.
This was lit too.
No,
I mean, this is like, see, this is the thing, Dr. Lacy, like we want to capture every crevice of relationships. So what you brought to this episode, this was like, this is big for us. This is new for us. Mm-hmm. And it's new to the initiates as well, which is why I think that they take into it like this. So we really appreciate that for you introducing us really to kind of what can really happen in these relationships and how to protect yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Janie Lacy, for coming up here and dropping the game for the people. Initiates, we love you. As a matter of fact, hold on, wait, Delano, are you able to pull this thing up? Is that possible? Because here's what we're about to do, guys, because I want to give you guys, again, this episode is going to be so different. We have two very different characters coming up here to this platform. We have Tim Ross, who you guys know very well, and we have another young sister coming up here. Her name is Princella. Now, I don't know if y'all know about Princella, but Princella is not a young lady. I can say I agree with a lot of what she puts out, but she has a very strong opinion, and she has a very growing audience. And I think it's very important for us to sit down, not only with the people that we necessarily agree with, but to be able to sit down and listen and understand one another. Because this young lady has had some very, very polarizing opinions in the space. And because it's growing how it is, we want to make sure that we are able to sit down and get some context and do it with people who are qualified, which is why we got Tim Ross joining us in this conversation. In fact, I think our team here actually put a video together just to give you some context on some of her perspectives. So Delano, can you please actually play this video for us so we can get some context? By the way, I have not watched this video.
I have not either.
So I don't even know what y'all gonna see. We all seeing this for the very first time together. So go ahead, Lano, let's drop it.
Man talk about is I want to strip everything that you are at your core away and make you somebody that I need. We want respect. All the male talks about is what he need and what he want. It ain't never about what he gives. I don't want to bruise y'all ego, but the male was created to be a slave. Men depend on women being dumb, right? Which is why they want young chicks who are impressionable.
Clap it up, clap it up, clap it up. Men register sex as a reward in their brain.
Men are predators by nature. Y'all hunt. They need that little thing between these women's legs. They gonna get it the easiest way they can.
Mike's back.
Nah, listen,
there we go.
That was a little menacing. She was really, she really coming after the brothers. So I don't know if she's just kind of been through some things or she just has a vendetta against the brothers. So we got to get somebody to defend us.
So we got
to get Tim Ross to talk to about healthy relationships.
Yeah. So listen. So it's going to be, again, we're going to have Tim Ross and Princella on here on Wednesday. And again, it's going to be a very, very different kind of conversation.
Yeah.
But listen, Hardly Initiated, if it's going to happen anywhere, it's going to happen on Hardly Initiated, and we're going to do it the right way. So y'all make sure y'all tune in with us. And man, y'all already know Hardly Initiated. We are out.